we're back. Okay. We left off at FBI analysis of legal and policy issues implicated by the draft statement. Comey told the OIG that he included criticism of former Secretary Clinton's uncharged conduct because, quote, unusual transparency was necessary for an unprecedented situation, unquote, and that such transparency, quote, was the best chance we had of having the American people have confidence that the justice system works, close quote. He said that he asked Baker and FBI OGC to, quote-unquote, scrub his draft statement and, quote, think about it through all possible policy legal lenses, unquote. He said that his recollection was that, quote, the only issue they thought that was worthy of discussion was the Privacy Act, and they thought they had their Privacy Act czar do a memo for me laying out why they thought it was fine under the Privacy Act, close quote. Comey said that Baker's advice to him was that there were no policy or legal issues created by you doing this. Baker told the OIG that he and other FBI OGC attorneys did see numerous legal and policy issues associated with the statement, but that they could not find a clear legal prohibition that would have prevented Comey from issuing the statement. Comey cited as precedent for his statement the press conference he gave in June 2004 when he was the Deputy Attorney General summarizing the evidence against Jose Padilla, a U.S. citizen who had been designated as an enemy combatant due to his support for al-Qaeda. He stated, I mean, it wasn't a case, but I actually remember when I was DAG providing extraordinary transparency to the public around Jose Padilla, which was a subject of great concern and controversy at the time, and I remember commissioning the draft of a very transparent statement about everything we knew about him and then pushing to get it declassified, get it reviewed for Privacy Act compliance. No, wrong place. Getting it reviewed for Privacy Act compliance, which we also did here, and then getting that out, so I remembered that pretty well. Comey also cited the department's letter to Congress summarizing the results of the criminal investigation into the Internal Revenue Service officials, including Louis Lerner. Comey said that the Lerner letter, which criticized IRS officials for, quote, mismanagement, poor judgment, and institutional inertia, unquote, that did not amount to criminal conduct, supported his decision to criticize former Secretary Clinton's handling of classified information, even in the absence of sufficient evidence to establish her criminal liability. And of course, the IRS case was after Obama said he wished someone would do something about the Republican diehards, or I should probably the tax revolters. What did you call them? Tea Party. The Tea Party revolters. You know, he had asked out loud, "Gee, I wish somebody could do something about these people." Next thing you know, the IRS starts slow rolling their 501c3 applications for nonprofit so they can get their campaigns running, and they can't get their authorization. They can't get the money into their campaign that they need to run, and they're having a hard time staying up with the people who are funded, namely the Democrats. Now, they did okay, but they could have done a lot better. Whether or not the Republican Party would have been better for it in the long run, I'm not going to say, but that was a case of the IRS using their political clout instead of their administrative clout to do the right thing. And Obama, hands were clean. He didn't tell them to do it. He just asked for someone to do it. But no criminal liability, even though the IRS deleted thousands of documents. Witnesses told us that the Privacy Act concerns stemmed largely from Comey's criticism of former Secretary Clinton's conduct in his draft statement, but that they believed including such criticism served a legitimate law enforcement function and thus was permitted. According to FBI Attorney 1, the high public interest in the case, the particular individual involved, and the need to deter others provided justifications for including the information. So it wasn't just that we weren't prosecuting her, but you didn't want to leave the impression with the rest of the community that she's getting away with something or that it is okay to do this, which you did. And so I think there was that balance. And that's why I don't think I thought so hard about the fact that we were talking about uncharged conduct of her. I was thinking more in terms of, well, we need to kind of balance this so that people understand that we're not giving her a clean bill of health, and that people can do this kind of activity. Anderson told the OIG that she expressed concerns about criticizing uncharged conduct during discussions with Comey in June 2016. She said that the decision to include such criticism, quote, was a signal that we weren't just letting her off the hook. Our conclusions were going to be viewed as less assailable at the end of the day if this kind of content was included, unquote. Baker told the OIG that, quote, there were multiple audiences, unquote, for the criticism of former Secretary Clinton in Comey's statement. He recounted hearing that FBI employees not involved in the Midyear investigation hated former Secretary Clinton and had made comments such as, quote, you guys are finally going to get that bitch, unquote, and, quote, we're rooting for you, unquote. Baker stated, and if we're not going to get her on these facts and circumstances, then we'd better explain that now. Related to this idea, notes taken by Strzok at a May 12, 2016 meeting involving the Midyear team state, message thoughts, workforce cues, questions, 1. If I did this, I'd be prosecuted. 2. Petraeus, Berger, etc. were charged. 3. Overwhelming conservative outlook. FBI Attorney 1 told the OIG that she also considered whether the July 5 statement would violate the department's election year sensitivities policy. As described in Chapter 2, that policy requires approval from the Public Integrity section of the Criminal Division before filing charges or taking overt investigative steps near the time of a primary or general election. However, the policy applies only to election crime cases. FBI Attorney 1 told us, someone mentioned the policy at that time, and I looked into it, and it's not specific to this kind of case. And that's kind of the problem, I think, with the policy. Baker told the OIG that the FBI took into account and complied with the requirement that department personnel obtain the approval of the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General for the public release of certain information. Baker said that Comey's call to lynch Ann Yates on the morning of his July 5th press conference, described below, telling them that he planned to hold a press conference later that morning, and their failure to instruct him not to do so constituted quote-unquote permission under department regulations. Baker said that this was so even though Comey called lynch Ann Yates only after calling the press, and he had refused to tell Lynch and Yates what he planned to say. When pressed by the OIG about this interpretation of the regulation, Baker acknowledged that it was quote-unquote aggressive. In comments to the draft report, Baker further explained that because Comey did call Yates and Lynch on July 5th, they could have demanded to know what he was going to say, and or they could have told him not to do it without a full discussion with them. They did not. One is the AG, the other is the DAG. They had an opportunity to say no or stop to the FBI director. For whatever reason, they did not. That is on them. Wow. Concerns about a public statement. Numerous witnesses told the OIG that, while they did not recall any significant disagreement within the FBI about whether Comey should do a public statement, there was concern about whether he should do one on his own, without advance notification to or coordination with the department. McCabe's initial reaction to the idea was that it would breach department protocol and create quote-unquote dangerous precedent for the FBI among quote a million other possible things unquote that could go wrong. However, McCabe told the OIG, quote, ultimately I was convinced that he was doing what he thought was right, and that was right for the case, unquote. Baker told the OIG that he raised similar concerns in various one-on-one discussions with Comey over an extended time period. Baker said he did so because he, quote, viewed it as my obligation to push back aggressively with respect to whatever Comey said if I thought it was wrong, unquote, and to make sure that all legal, policy, and ethical issues were fully evaluated, and to, quote, think about how others would think about things, unquote, from different perspectives and at different times. Baker said that he and Comey discussed a range of options for announcing a declination and thought through the benefits and drawbacks of each, quote, trying to find some door other than the doors that led to hell, unquote. Door number 6. the road to hell. Comey also sought input from his former FBI Chief of Staff, Chuck Rosenberg, who at the time was the acting administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Comey told the OIG that in May and June 2016, he spoke to Rosenberg and, quote, sounded him out, unquote, about the possibility of doing an FBI-only press announcement to close the investigation. According to Comey, Rosenberg was concerned that doing a statement would be unprecedented, expose Comey to, quote, extraordinary fire, unquote, and create an irreparable breach with the department. Comey said that Rosenberg thought that doing the statement was, quote unquote, a close call, but on the balance, it's a right call. Rosenberg told the OIG that he spoke to Comey 3 times about the draft statement. He said that Comey first reached out to him in late April or early May 2016, before there was a draft statement and well before the tarmac meeting between Lynch and former President Clinton. Rosenberg said that Comey was seeking guidance on whether he should make a public statement to announce the FBI was closing the mid-year investigation or should do a referral to the department. Rosenberg described Comey as, quote-unquote, wrestling with the decision and trying to figure out the right thing to do. Rosenberg said that Comey showed him a hard copy of the May 2nd draft statement and told him that he planned to do the statement on his own without coordinating with the department. Rosenberg said that Comey thought he could more credibly announce the declination without the department because of the quote-unquote politics of having an attorney general appointed by a Democratic president close an investigation into a Democratic presidential nominee without charges. Asked whether Comey discussed concerns about Lynch based on her instruction to him to call the investigation a quote-unquote matter or classified issues reflecting potential bias by her, Rosenberg said that he did not recall Comey mentioning those to him. Rosenberg said that he had 2 competing reactions to the statement. He said that on one hand, it was, quote, outside the norm, unquote, and inconsistent with the department's practice, and that had the FBI publicly announced a recommendation when he was a U.S. attorney, instead of giving it to him privately, he would not have been happy. On the other hand, he thought that Comey was a quote-unquote compelling and credible public servant, and that he understood why Comey thought he could, quote, do this and do it well, unquote. Rosenberg said that he did not tell Comey that it was a good or bad idea, but instead raised questions about what other options were available and the potential ramifications of an FBI director giving a public declination. Rosenberg said that he recalled telling Comey it was a, quote, 52 to 48 call, unquote, but that he went back and forth on whether the 52 weighed in favor of or against doing the statement. You're a lot of help, Rosenberg. Comey's decision to not inform the department. As described above, documents and testimony indicate that Comey planned to do the statement independently without advance notice to the department even before the tarmac meeting between Lynch and former President Bill Clinton. Comey acknowledged that he made a conscious decision not to tell department leadership about his plans to independently announce a declination because he was concerned that they would instruct him not to do it, and that he made this decision when he first conceived of the idea to do the statement. He stated, come May, and I'm trying to figure out how the end game should work to preserve the option that I ended up concluding was best suited to protect the institutions. I couldn't tell them that I was considering that, because if I told them that in my mind, I drew the spectrum, at one end of the spectrum is I'm going to announce separate from you what the FBI thinks about this and very practical about it. They say, I remember thinking this. If I surfaced that with them, they might well say, I order you not to do that, and then I would abide that. I wouldn't do that. And so I remember saying to the Midyear team when I circulated in May my first draft, I said, what would look like I said, what would the most one end of the spectrum, what would that option look like? I said, keep this close hold. I mean, you can have conversations with the Department of Justice about the end game, but don't tell them I'm considering this, because then that option is going from us. So he said if they knew and they told him not to do it, he wouldn't do it. But he's actively keeping this from them in order to not have that result. And they're saying that he shouldn't have been fired. Because if I were the DAG Maybe they wouldn't have, but what I was thinking was, if I'm the DAG, I say, just to be clear, I order you not to make any statements on this case without coordinating with us. And so, to be honest, I would lose that option. Sorry. Asked whether he owed it to department leadership to inform them of what he was thinking so that they could make a decision on behalf of the department, Comey stated, quote, in a normal circumstance, sure, unquote. He explained that the mid-year investigation was not a normal circumstance. To my mind, the peril to the department, including the FBI, was so extraordinary, the potential for damage to the institution, that I needed to preserve that option. And so, look, everything about this is unprecedented, and God willing, no director will ever face this circumstance, but I thought that to protect the institution I care about so much, I have to preserve that option. Of course, in a normal circumstance, it's the right of the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General to make those decisions, and the FBI director should tell them, but this was not the normal circumstance. I think I'm allergic to something. My nose is just itching all day. Comey told the OIG that he did not credibly think that Lynch and Yates were going to stop him when he informed them about his plans on the morning of his press conference, and that he wrestled with whether to tell them at all. June 27, 2016 Tarmac meeting and aftermath. A. Meeting between Lynch and former President Clinton. 1. How the meeting came about. I've always wondered about this. I said earlier that it seemed to be an extraordinary circumstance that Clinton wound up on the same airport, Sky Harbor in Phoenix, at the same time as Lynch, and was able to get on board her plane for a half hour and not interfere with her schedule to a certain degree. This should explain that, I hope. On June 27, 2016, Lynch flew to Phoenix as the first stop in a week-long community policing tour. Traveling with her were her husband, her deputy chief of staff, a senior counselor to the AG, senior counselor, a supervisor in the department's Office of Public Affairs, OPA supervisor, and another department official. Lynch told the OIG that her plane landed several hours late, and they arrived in Phoenix around 7 p.m. local time. According to department witnesses, Lynch's staff left the plane first and boarded the staff van. Lynch remained on the plane with her husband and the head of her security detail and waited to get off the plane until her motorcade was ready. The OPA supervisor explained that this practice is a standard FBI protocol and is intended to leave the Attorney General, quote, out in the open for the least amount of time, unquote. Approximately 20 to 30 yards from Lynch's plane was a private plane with former President Bill Clinton on it. Former President Clinton had been in Phoenix for several campaign events, including a roundtable discussion with Latino leaders and a campaign fundraiser, and his plane was preparing to depart. Okay. A coincidence. All right. I take back what I said earlier about it being really, really suspicious. The meeting was suspicious, but the meeting, they're coming together, it was not as suspicious as I thought it was. So I'm schooled on that. I take it back. Former President Clinton said that he did not know in advance that Lynch was in Phoenix and was not aware that her plane was close to his until his staff told him. Asked about news reports that he purposely delayed his takeoff to speak to Lynch, former President Clinton stated, "It's absolutely not true. I literally didn't know she was there until somebody told me she was there. And we looked out the window and it was really close and all of her staff was unloading. So I thought, she's about to get off and I'll just go shake hands with her when she gets off. I don't want her to think that I'm afraid to shake hands with her because she's the Attorney General and because your wife's being investigated on possible mishandling of classified, secret, top secret, and special access protocol information. Heaven forbid you would do the right thing and not get involved with someone who is investigating your wife. But it's Bill, so rules don't apply." Former President Clinton said that he did not consider that meeting with Lynch might impact the investigation into his wife's use of a private email server. He stated, "Well, what I didn't want to do is to look like I was having some big huddled up session with her, because it was a paranoid time. But I knew I believed to be the truth of that whole thing. It was, after all, my server, and the FBI knew it was there, and the Secret Service approved it coming in, and she just used what was mine." As a result, he said that he never thought the investigation amounted to much, frankly, so I probably didn't take it as seriously as maybe I might have in this unusual period. Bill, here's the thing though. That server went through 3 iterations of 3 different um, um, physical aspects. 3 different physical servers were created after you had had yours. So don't tell me that it was just, a thing that had been there before and that she used it on the side. She created that after she became Secretary of State. Or was it just before? Right around that time, she knew she was going to be Secretary of State, and that new server appeared. So don't give me that, oh, it was mine the whole time crap. Former President Clinton said that he recalled walking toward Lynch's plane with his chief of staff and that Lynch and her staff were, quote, getting off the airplane, unquote. He said that he greeted Lynch, who was on the plane, and Lynch stated, look, it's 100 degrees out there. Come up and we'll talk about our grandkids. The Attorney General inviting the husband of a active subject of an investigation onto her private plane for a private conversation about grandkids. The senior counselor told the OIG that she was waiting in the van with the 3 other department employees on the trip, and she saw 2 people walking toward Lynch's plane. She said that as the 2 people went up the stairs to the plane, she realized that one of them was former President Clinton. The senior counselor said she saw the head of Lynch's security detail turn away the second person at the door and allow former President Clinton to board the plane. Other witnesses recalled that former President Clinton had additional staff members with him and that these people did not board the plane. So it's 100 degrees out for Bill, so come inside, but the rest of you, I understand maybe it's a security issue, but still, you're the plebs, so screw you. The deputy chief of staff said that she had quote-unquote zero knowledge that former President Clinton was there before she saw him approach the plane. She stated, and if I had knowledge, I would not have been in that van. I would have stayed on the plane and got everybody off. No heads up or anything. The senior counselor said she asked everyone in the van if they knew that former President Clinton was going to be there, and they all said no. The OPA supervisor said that he later learned that former President Clinton's Secret Service detail had contacted Lynch's FBI security detail and let them know that the former president wanted to meet with Lynch. Coincidence, my ass. Although Lynch's staff was supposed to receive notice of such requests, witnesses told us that they were not informed of the request from former President Clinton. Lynch said that she was on the plane with her husband and the head of her security detail, and they were preparing to leave when she learned that former Clinton had asked to speak with her. She stated, "We were walking toward the front door, and then the head of my detail stopped and spoke to someone outside the plane and turned around and said, former President Clinton is here, and he wants to say hello to you. And I think my initial reaction was the profound statement, 'What?' Something like that. And he repeated that. And he spoke again to someone outside the plane. And we were about to walk off the plane. We were going to go down the stairs and get into the motorcade and go on. And the head of my detail said, 'Can he come on and say hello to you?' And I said, yes, he could come on the plane and say hello. And he was literally there. So I don't know if he was talking to President Clinton or somebody else. I don't know who was on the steps." Lynch said that former President Clinton boarded the plane in a matter of seconds, suggesting that he was in the stairwell near the door to the plane. Lynch said that she was very surprised that he wanted to meet with her because they did not have a social relationship, and she was also surprised to see him, quote, right there in the doorway so quickly. Lynch said that she had, quote, never really had a conversation, unquote, with former President Clinton before this meeting, or with former Secretary Clinton at any time. She said that, quote unquote, years ago, when she was the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, she saw former Secretary Clinton at a 9/11 event and said hello. Did she pass out? That was a cheap shot. Sorry, but Hillary does have a history of not making it all the way through 9/11 events. She said that she also saw both of them at the funeral for former Vice President Joe Biden's son, Beau Biden, which was held on June 6, 2015. She said that she recalled that during the conversation, former President Clinton congratulated her on the FIFA corruption case. Lynch told the OIG that she did not have a social relationship or socialize with either former President Clinton or former Secretary Clinton. However, Lynch said that public officials often stopped her to say hello when she traveled, and that as a result, she was not initially concerned when former President Clinton wanted to say hello. He should have been concerned. For example, Lynch told us that Ohio Governor John Kasich, who was a candidate in the 2016 Republican presidential primary, stopped her one time to say hello in an airport, and they had a 10-minute conversation even though they had never met before. The OPA supervisor told the OIG it wouldn't be uncommon for Lynch to match courtesy with courtesy, regardless of whether the person was Republican, Democrat, whatever, or the husband of someone subject of an investigation under your department. Again, Kasich, Republican candidate, totally above board. Clinton, hey, just because I'm investigating his wife doesn't mean I can't talk to him privately for a half hour. Discussion between former President Clinton and Lynch. During our review, we found no contemporaneous evidence, such as notes documenting the substance of the discussion between Lynch and former President Clinton. The only documentary evidence we identified that summarized the meeting were quote-unquote talking points created by Lynch's staff after the meeting became a subject of controversy, as discussed in Section 4B. Former President Clinton and Lynch denied that they discussed the mid-year investigation, the upcoming interview of Secretary Clinton, or any other department investigation, or plans for Lynch to serve in some capacity in a Hillary Clinton administration. None of those came up. How could they? We summarize below what they told us about their discussion. Former President Clinton's testimony. Former President Clinton told us that he congratulated Lynch on being named Attorney General and mentioned several things that she had done that he thought were good policy, such as continuing with criminal justice reforms that were implemented by former Attorney General Eric Holder, Obama's wingman. If you want to know about Eric Holder, just look up Operation Fast and Furious. That's all you need to know about Eric Holder. He said that they then talked about their grandchildren, his recent visit to see former Attorney General Janet Reno, and his golf game. I don't think Lynch is a golfer. We asked former President Clinton if he had discussed Brexit or West Virginia coal policy with Lynch. He said he did not recall Brexit coming up, but acknowledged that he probably did discuss it with her because he was very worried that it would disrupt the Irish peace process. When asked whether his comments included the potential implications of the Brexit vote and the rise of populism for the U.S. election, he stated that he did not remember discussing that, but that one of his quote-unquote automatic responses during the campaign was to describe how the press had underestimated the reaction to globalization and the resulting identity crisis, and how Brexit was simply a manifestation of that. As a result, he said he could not rule out that he said something similar to Lynch. Former President Clinton also said that he did not recall mentioning West Virginia coal policy to Lynch, but that he would not be shocked if he had done so because he thought a lot about it, and we frequently talked about the issue. Former President Clinton said he did not recall telling Lynch that she was doing a great job, but told us he probably did so because, quote, the Justice Department, when President Obama's there, I thought they did a lot of good things that needed doing, especially in criminal justice, unquote. Yeah, except keeping track of themselves, committing crimes all over the place. However, he denied that his comments were motivated by an intent to influence the investigation. He told us that he did not recall telling Lynch that she was his favorite cabinet member, and he did not think it was likely that he would have made such a comment. He stated, I like her, but I'm very close to Tom Vislak and was very close to a couple of the others, so I couldn't have said that, but I do like her a lot. Former President Clinton said he only mentioned former Secretary Clinton once during discussion, and that concerned how happy she was to be a grandmother. He said he told Lynch that she was a happy grandmother and an ardent one, and that we were very lucky because our daughter and her husband and our grandchildren live in New York, so they were about an hour from us in a decent traffic day. And I told her that before the campaign was underway, Hillary and I used to see our grandkids every week, and in the best weeks, she would see them once when she was down there. Then I would see them once, and then we'd see them together once. And I was down, and I remember talking about every now and then we got them up in Chappaqua, where we live, and it was quite bracing trying to keep up with them and how much fun it was, and that's really what we talked about. My God, are there more than 2 pieces of punctuation in that entire paragraph? I do remember saying that grandparents typically say it's better than being a parent because it's all the fun and none of the responsibilities, and I told Chelsea once after her daughter was born that she would never hear me say that I still thought being her father was the best gig I ever had. Well, then you're a lousy grandfather. When asked whether they discussed former Secretary Clinton's upcoming interview with the FBI, Clinton replied, "Absolutely not. It wouldn't have been appropriate for me to talk to her about any of that, and I didn't. Well, it wasn't appropriate for you to meet her in private, but you did anyway." He said that they also did not discuss the mid-year investigation, the Clinton Foundation matter, any other department investigation, the Benghazi hearings held by Congress, or then FBI Director Comey. We asked former President Clinton whether he discussed the possibility of Lynch serving as Attorney General or in another position in the future Hillary Clinton administration, or a possible judicial nomination. He stated, "No, not even with anybody else, not with Hillary, not with anybody. We didn't discuss that because I'm very superstitious. I never discuss anything like that. I want everybody to focus on the matter at hand, and I thought the environment was much more volatile than a lot of people did." Former President Clinton also said that he was a little surprised by the criticism after his tarmac meeting with Lynch. Clinton is always surprised by criticism. He stated, "The mainstream media wasn't as bad on that as they were on a lot of things, I thought. I think the ones that they were criticizing me, I thought, I don't know whether I'm more offended that they think I'm crooked or that they think I'm stupid. I've got an idea. I'll do all these things they accuse me of doing in broad daylight in an airport in Phoenix when the whole world can see it in front of Air Force One crew and I believe one of her security guards. It was an interesting proposition, but no, we did not." Lynch's testimony. As described above, Lynch said the head of her security detail told her that former President Clinton wanted to speak to her, and she thought that he could come on the plane and say hello. Lynch told the OIG that she thought that she and former President Clinton would briefly exchange greetings, and then she would get off the plane. She described what happened after he boarded the plane. "Well, first, we're standing in the cabin of the plane because, again, he's saying he wanted to say hello. I introduced him to my husband. We were standing up because I thought we were going to stand up, say hello, and then keep walking. There were 2 members of the flight crew in the back section of the plane. So President Clinton shook hands with the head of my detail, with my husband, with me. He went back and spoke to the 2 members of the flight crew, and he stayed back there for a few minutes, like 5 minutes maybe, because he spoke individually to each of them for a few minutes. And they were very excited, He was very gracious to them. He probably also told them to stay the hell in the back of the airplane for another 20 minutes. Lynch said that former President Clinton then returned to the front of the plane where she and her husband were standing and began talking to her husband. She said they had a brief discussion about Lynch's trip to Phoenix, Clinton's new grandchild, and various family issues, including how to deal with sibling rivalry. She said they were still standing during this discussion, but that former President Clinton sat down after a few minutes. At some point, after 2 or 3 minutes, President Clinton turned around. I had my tote bags on the bench seat of the plane because I had put them there when he came on board. I had been holding them. I put them down. He picked up my tote bags and moved them, and then he sat down. So he sat down, and my husband and I were still standing in front of him having the discussion. And he sort of sat heavily, and I didn't know how he felt. So I can't say one way or the other, but he sat down and started talking about, the grandkids and how they introduced them to each other. And ultimately, because this went on for a little, but my husband and I sat down also and, had that discussion about his family and the kids. She said that after this, the discussion continued, with former President Clinton doing most of the talking. She stated, "Well, after he was sharing with us his story about how they introduced the 2 grandchildren to each other, which involved a toy, and that was green, and just again the family issues, he said, 'What brings you to Phoenix?' And I said, 'I'm here on a police tour, and I'm doing a lot about the law enforcement community relations.' And I said, 'How did you find Phoenix?' He mentioned that he had been there for several meetings, he had played golf. I made a reference to the heat because it was still incredibly hot while we landed, which was why we were still in the plane. And he made a comment about playing golf, and you can manage the heat. He was talking a lot about the golfing issue as well, but nothing of substance about that. And he asked about my travels, and I said that I had been recently traveling to China, and I had come back for the Pulse nightclub shooting. I had been to Alaska and met with Native youth. And then I said, that was an issue of great importance to former Attorney General Janet Reno. Have you talked with her lately, and do you know about her health?" And he said, "Yes, I've seen her. I visited her along with Donna Shalala. I visited her, and he told me about when. And then I said because she's not doing very well. We talked about that for a few minutes. And I remember at that point saying, well, thank you very much, kind of thing. And he sort of continued chatting on and made a comment about his travels he was headed on. And I said, well, we've got to get going to the hotel. And I said, I'm sure you've got somewhere to go. And he said yes. And I forget where he told me he was going, but he was flying somewhere, but I've forgotten where. He said, I'm going to wherever I'm off to. And then he made some comment about West Virginia. And I do not know if he was headed to West Virginia. I just don't know if that was a reference to it. And he made a comment about West Virginia and coal issues and how their problems really stem from policies that were set forth in 1932. And he talked about those policies for a while, and I said, okay, well. According to Lynch, Clinton discussed West Virginia coal policy as an historical issue, not in connection with the campaign. She said that he discussed Brexit in a similar context, talking about the cultural issues that led to the decision and whether, quote, people in the UK viewed themselves as citizens of the world or the country or whatever. Gee, go figure, Clinton was not a fan of Brexit. In response to specific questions asked by the OIG, Lynch said that she and former President Clinton did not discuss the mid-year investigation or any other department investigation, James Comey, Donald Trump, or the upcoming presidential election. She said that they also did not discuss possible positions for her in a future Hillary Clinton administration, a potential nomination to the Supreme Court, or her future plans after President Obama left office. Lynch said that Clinton told her that she was, quote, doing a great job as a cabinet member, or words to that effect, unquote. She said that she thought that he was flattering her and, quote, would have said that to every cabinet member at that time. No, I viewed it as him being jovial, honestly, and being genial, close quote. Lynch estimated that she talked to former President Clinton for approximately 20 minutes before a member of her staff came back onto the plane, and as we describe below. She said that she became increasingly concerned as the meeting, quote, went on, unquote. Lynch said that when she thought about it later that evening and discussed it with her staff about it in the context of the case, she concluded, quote, that it was just too long a conversation to have had. It went beyond, hi, how are you, shake hands, move on sort of thing. It went beyond the discussions I've had with other people in public life, even in political life. It went beyond that in terms of length, close quote. Intervention by Lynch's staff. While former President Clinton was on the plane, Lynch's staff were waiting in the staff van. The deputy chief of staff said that they quickly realized that the meeting was problematic because Clinton was not just the former president, but was also the husband of someone who was under investigation. So the staff has the optics, but Clinton doesn't and Lynch doesn't. The deputy chief of staff said that she felt, quote-unquote, shocked, and that they all, quote-unquote, just felt completely blindsided. The senior counselor said that they immediately were aware that the meeting was ill-advised and that, quote, the optics were not great. The OPA supervisor said that he waited approximately 5 minutes and then he left the van. He said he went over to one of the other agents on Lynch's security detail who was waiting in the vehicle that was going to carry Lynch. The OPA supervisor said that he asked the agent what was going on, whether there had been any notice that former President Clinton wanted to say hello, and how long he was supposed to be on the plane. The OPA supervisor said that the agent did not know. According to the OPA supervisor, he asked the agent to tell the head of Lynch's security detail that Lynch needed to end the meeting. The OPA supervisor stated, quote, and I don't know that the head of Lynch's security detail thought it was appropriate to ask her to wrap it up because I guess that's his boss too, unquote. The OPA supervisor said that there was a photographer outside and he recalled telling the photographer that Lynch would not be taking pictures. The OPA supervisor said that he remembered telling the photographer that he, the photographer, needed to go back in his car. The OPA supervisor stated, I'm going back in my car, like no one is hanging out. I like President Clinton too. I'm not hanging out for a photo. The OPA supervisor said that he then got back in the staff van. By this time, former President Clinton had been on the plane for approximately 10 to 15 minutes. The deputy chief of staff said that they were discussing the need for someone to go back on the plane when the senior counselor, who led the Phoenix portion of the trip and therefore was seated in the front of the van closest to the door, told the group that she was going to go and jumped out of the van. The deputy chief of staff said, quote, and then the senior counselor was just running upstairs, And so that's when we decided to do something, unquote. The senior counselor described her thinking at the time, and I don't know what's going on up there, but I should at least go up to intervene or help her if she needs help. I think it was part uncertainty and part kind of like, this is a bad idea. The senior counselor said that when she tried to get back on the plane, she was stopped by the head of Lynch's security detail who was at the door of the plane. The senior counselor said that she told him that Lynch's meeting with the former President Clinton was not a good idea and that she needed to get back on the plane, but he still would not let her on. The senior counselor said that she then asked him to convey to Lynch that she was advising that the meeting was a bad idea. According to the senior counselor, he told her, "All right, why don't you tell her yourself," and finally allowed her to board. The senior counselor said that when she got on the plane, she saw Lynch's husband, and former President Clinton sitting down and, quote, chatting in a casual way, unquote. The senior counselor said that she walked up to the three of them and stood there hoping that her presence would break up the meeting. She said that Lynch saw her and introduced her to former President Clinton, and she shook his hand. The senior counselor said that she hoped this would get everyone moving, but then former President Clinton sat back down. The senior counselor stated, "So then I kind of didn't know what to do because it was a little bit unusual to be in a room with a former president and say, 'You need to leave.' So I think I stared at them for a little bit longer and then went back to where the head of Lynch's security detail was standing. The senior counselor said that she considered whether she should go get someone else or go back over to Lynch and tell her, 'Look, ma'am, we have to go.' She then said she went and stood in front of the group again. The senior counselor said that her presence prompted Lynch to tell former President Clinton that the reason she, the senior counselor, was standing there was that she was too polite to tell Lynch that they had to go." That's pretty good. If that happened, let's give it to Lynch. The senior counselor said that Lynch told former President Clinton, "And we do have to go. You know, we have a pretty busy schedule." The senior counselor said that she could not recall what Lynch and former President Clinton were discussing, but that her impression was that Lynch was, quote, uncomfortable and wanted the meeting to be done, unquote. Lynch said that after the senior counselor got back on the plane, former President Clinton commented, "Oh, she's mad at me because I've been on the plane too long, and she's come to get you." Lynch said that she replied to him, quote, well, we do have to go, and then he kept talking about something else. She said that he kept talking for a good 5 minutes after the senior counselor got back on the plane. Lynch said that she finally stood up and said, "You know, it was very nice of you to come. Thank you so much, and just thank you for stopping by." She said that they said goodbye several times and that her husband shook former President Clinton's hand again. Former President Clinton then left the plane, and a huge sigh was released by all. The senior counselor said she went to talk to Lynch after former President Clinton left. She stated, "And I kind of looked at her, and I think I said something like, 'That was not great,' or something like that. And she's like, 'Yeah.' She described Lynch as looking kind of gray, you know, not pleased. The senior counselor said that after they left the plane, she got into the staff van. Lynch got into her vehicle, and they went to the hotel. She said that they did not talk to Lynch about what happened until the next day. The deputy chief of staff told the OIG that they did not attempt to get information from the head of Lynch's security detail about the conversation that took place on the plane. She explained, "And my only conversation with the head of Lynch's security detail was a rare, fairly admonishing one, just saying, 'This is not okay, this shouldn't be the protocol, you didn't contact me, you could have radioed your FBI guy in the van to say, send someone up.' So my conversation was not a very pleasant one by the time I talked to the head of Lynch's security detail. So I didn't ask questions like, 'Oh, what did you hear?' I was just like, 'We need to figure this out, and this never needs to happen again.'" The deputy chief of staff said that the security protocol was changed almost immediately as a result of what happened. Under the revised protocol, the senior counselor, i.e., the staff member in charge of the trip, was required to remain on the plane with Lynch and the head of her security detail and to escort her at other times. Responding to media questions about the tarmac meeting, Melanie Newman, the director of OPA, said that the OPA supervisor called her from the van and sounded the alarm, telling her that he saw former President Clinton board Lynch's plane. According to Newman, She asked the OPA supervisor a number of questions, including why former President Clinton was there and whether he had a press pool with them, which he could not answer. Newman said that she asked the OPA supervisor to get out of the van and figure out what was going on. Newman said that she was not concerned that there was a press event going on that day, that there was a press event going on that they did not know about, but that the potential implications for the investigation were obvious to everyone except, apparently, the FBI agents on the Attorney General's detail. Newman said that the OPA supervisor called her back approximately 30 minutes later after the senior counselor had returned to the van. According to Newman, the OPA supervisor told her there was no press pool, but that former President Clinton had his own photographer there. Newman said that the OPA supervisor told her that former President Clinton had asked Lynch's FBI detail if he could go on Lynch's plane, and no one had communicated this to her staff. Newman stated, "No one talks to the AG without staff saying they can talk to the AG, but they didn't do this because he's a former president." I have to check something here. I wonder. No, it's fine. Okay. I couldn't tell if the chat had been frozen or not. Newman said that the OPA supervisor called her back approximately 30 minutes later after the senior counselor had returned to the van. According to Newman, the OPA supervisor told her that there was no press pool, but that former President Clinton had his own photographer there. Newman said that the OPA supervisor told her that former President Clinton had asked Lynch's FBI detail if he could go on Lynch's plane, and no one had communicated this to her staff. Newman stated, "No one talks to the AG without staff saying that they can talk to the AG, but they didn't do this because he's a former president, whose wife is under investigation." Newman said she spoke to Lynch and the staff traveling with her by phone the next day, June 28, 2016. According to Newman, during this call, Lynch described how the meeting with former President Clinton happened, what they discussed, and how she had tried to end the discussion. Newman characterized Lynch as quote-unquote devastated about the tarmac meeting. She stated, "Lynch doesn't take mistakes lightly, and she felt like she had made an incredible mistake in judgment by saying yes instead of no that he could come on the plane. But also, she's like the most polite Southern person alive. I don't know in what circumstances she would have said no, or what would have happened if she had said no. I would have much preferred a story that the Attorney General turned a former President of the United States away on the tarmac, but she doesn't make mistakes, and she was not pleased with herself for making this kind of high-stakes mistake." Newman said that they discussed the best way to respond to any press questions about the meeting. She said that Lynch had a press conference scheduled in Phoenix, so she, Newman, wanted to have talking points prepared in case someone asked about the meeting with former President Clinton. At approximately 1:15 EDT, Newman received an email from an ABC News reporter asking about the meeting between Lynch and former President Clinton based on information from its Phoenix affiliate. Newman said that this inquiry confirmed that the meeting would come up at Lynch's press conference, and she sped up the process to develop talking points. Newman forwarded the inquiry to the OPA supervisor and Lynch's acting chief of staff, stating, "We need to talk." The acting chief of staff arranged a conference call and added Max Axelrod, the deputy chief of staff and the senior counselor, to the list of invitees. However, the OPA supervisor and the senior counselor were waiting for an event in Phoenix to begin and could not join the call. Following the call, Newman emailed a short draft statement to the senior counselor and the deputy chief of staff, copying Axelrod, the acting chief of staff, the OPA supervisor, and Peter Kazik, the AG for the Office of Legislative Affairs. Move this over. OLA. A number of additional emails and phone calls followed the draft as the draft statement was expanded and edited to include talking points about the topics Lynch and former President Clinton discussed. Newman then emailed the statement to Lynch and her staff. During Lynch's Phoenix press conference, a local reporter asked Lynch about her meeting with former President Clinton and whether Benghazi was discussed. She answered the question based on the talking points and draft statement. "No, actually, while I was landing at the airport, I did see President Clinton at the Phoenix airport as I was leaving, and he spoke to myself and my husband on the plane. Our conversation was a great deal about his grandchildren. It was primarily social and about our travels. He mentioned the golf he played in Phoenix and he mentioned travels he'd had in West Virginia. We talked about former Attorney General Janet Reno, for example, whom we both know, but there was no discussion of any matter pending before the department or any matter pending before any other body. There was no discussion of Benghazi, no discussion of the State Department emails by way of example. I would say the current news of the day was the Brexit decision and what that might mean. Again, the department's not involved with that or implicated in that. Lynch did not receive any follow-up questions from either the reporter who asked the question or from other reporters in attendance. Kid gloves, folks, kid gloves. Based on the lack of follow-up questions, Newman decided not to release a statement about Lynch's meeting with former President Clinton. However, by the following afternoon, several media organizations had begun picking up coverage of the meeting. Excuse me. On June 29, 2016, Newman emailed Lynch's statement at her Phoenix press conference and the department's talking points to two officials in the FBI's Office of Public Affairs, stating, "I want to flag a story that is gaining some traction tonight about a casual, unscheduled meeting between former President Bill Clinton and the AG. The FBI OPA officials forwarded the talking points to McCabe, Rybicki, and Comey. We discussed the impact of the tarmac meeting on Comey's decision not to tell the department about his decision to do a public statement in Section 4E below. Discussion about possible recusal, departmental ethics opinion. Lynch told the OIG that she began discussing whether she needed to recuse herself from the mid-year investigation on June 28, 2016, the morning after the tarmac incident. Lynch said that she called her acting chief of staff, who was back in Washington, D.C., and asked her to contact the Departmental Ethics Office to find out if ethics regulations required recusal. Lynch said, and the acting chief of staff confirmed, that she obtained an oral ethics opinion that there was no legal requirement to recuse herself. Legal requirement. Janice Rogers, the former director of the Departmental Ethics Office, said that she remembered receiving a phone call from someone on Lynch's staff, although she did not remember who it was. Rogers said that she spoke to Lynch's staff member over the phone, and after hearing what happened, a one-sided version of what happened, concluded that the ethics regulations did not require recusal. Rogers stated her understanding of the facts. The fact that the subject's spouse had, I don't know what the right word is, sort of engineered a, contact with the AG, which was apparently, completely non-substantive in my view, and also in circumstances that made it very difficult for the AG to decline or avoid contact. If that meeting had been proposed through the proper personnel on Lynch's staff, it never would have happened. Somehow, Clinton was able to subvert normal protocol and get on that plane. I wonder how. Rogers said that the question was more of a casual political issue, meaning people were going to make hay of it, and that department leadership would have to weigh the amount of heat they were willing to take versus the importance of Lynch's participation in the matter. She stated, quote, "There was nothing about that required a recusal. Whether the AG chose to recuse based on the sort of more global considerations was out of my bailiwick," unquote. Discussions about voluntary recusal. Lynch said that she then considered whether Lynch said that she then considered whether she should recuse voluntarily based on appearance concerns, i.e., concerns that the meeting created the appearance that former President Clinton was influencing the mid-year investigation through her, or that she was influencing it by having a connection to him. Lynch said she wanted to be able to make a statement about her plans for remaining involved in the mid-year investigation during an interview with the Washington Post reporter at the Aspen Ideas Festival, which was scheduled for the last day of her trip, July 1st, 2016. Lynch said she held a number of calls that involved Yates, Axelrod, Newman, the acting chief of staff, and other department officials, and that these calls likely took place on the Wednesday or Thursday of that week. She said she also discussed the issue with the staff members who were traveling with her. Lynch said that she did not recall anyone expressing the view that she should recuse herself. She said that her staff raised issues and concerns for discussion, but no one presented her with the conclusion that she should recuse. Discussions involving Yates, Axelrod, and other department officials. Yates told the OIG that the groups participating in these calls quickly dismissed the idea of recusal because they knew that the department was going to announce what they expected to be a declination in a matter of days. She stated, and the fear was that this is going to look really artificial. If you've spent over a year with Lynch at the helm of this investigating it, and then this tarmac thing happens and she recuses, that's going to look really artificial then if all of a sudden somebody else is announcing it and we're saying, oh, there's no problem with the tarmac because she's recused, when really that decision had been all but made while she was AG. I'm sorry, she should have recused. I'm sorry. It looks terrible. It looks absolutely terrible. If she'd recused, Comey would have still made that insane statement without coordinating with the Department of State, or the Department of Justice, excuse me, and the egg would have been all over Comey's face anyway. Lynch wouldn't have been touched by it if she had recused herself. That was a very bad decision, in my opinion. Axelrod expressed a similar opinion and stated that other factors weighed against recusal as well. In particular, he said that he understood that Lynch had not discussed anything improper with former President Clinton, and for her to recuse would have made it look like she had. No. The mere appearance of that discussion being about Hillary was enough for her to recuse, in my opinion. You didn't need for confirmation of Clinton pushing her to give Hillary a fair deal, giving Hillary a leg up in the investigation. You didn't need for that to be confirmed. The mere appearance of that meeting was enough. Again, my opinion. He said he also thought that the people calling for her recusal would not be satisfied by it. I thought that for folks who had already, again, for political reasons, had been calling for a special counsel, I wasn't sure that a recusal would be sufficient, that it would end there with the AG stepping aside and the DAG taking over. I thought calls would increase for department leadership to step out altogether, which again I didn't think was good for the integrity of the investigation, and that was my goal, was to protect the integrity of the investigation. And as soon as she met with Clinton, the integrity of that investigation went to hell. Axelrod told the OIG that he did not specifically recall having a discussion with Rybicki or McCabe about the tarmac incident, but said that he was, quote, sure he did have conversations. This would be a big thing not to have a conversation about, end quote. Rybicki told us that Axelrod called him early in the week to tell him that the tarmac meeting had happened. McCabe said that he also spoke to Axelrod a day or two after the tarmac meeting, and that Axelrod told him that Lynch likely would not recuse herself from the Midyear investigation. Tosca said he was on vacation the week of the tarmac meeting, and Axelrod contacted him by phone to tell him about it. Tosca said that he contacted Loffman, and that both he and Loffman thought that a recusal was unwise. Tosca stated, I thought that a recusal would make it look like, oh, this person who was doing inappropriate things has been overseeing this thing for a long time now, so that means the whole thing is tainted by it. That would actually probably be more harmful to our investigation and the appearance to the public of our investigation. I think you made a bad decision there, buddy. Lynch said that she decided not to recuse herself from the Midyear investigation. In making this decision, Lynch said she considered whether her meeting with former President Clinton would cause people not to have faith in the judgment or decisions of the department. She said she weighed this against the concern that stepping aside would create a misimpression that she and former President Clinton had discussed inappropriate topics, or that her role in the case somehow was greater than it was. She explained that other considerations informed her decision. And I also had the view that, when you create a situation, as I felt I did by sitting down with the president, it can be almost a relief in some ways to say, you know what? I'm going to recuse myself and get out of it and not take the hits. And then you're just asking someone else to step up and endure all the hits the department will take for the case, for the result, whatever it is. That's what they're paid for. That's what deputies are paid for. And, I thought about it from that angle as well. You're just asking someone else to step up and do your job for you. And if I did not think it rose to the level of recusal, then I did not want to do something out of a desire to protect myself sort of personally from embarrassment, also because that's not the way to make someone else take responsibility. Lynch said she took into account that NSD did not think recusal was necessary. She said she conveyed her regrets to the Midyear prosecutors for putting them in a position of having people outside the department look at their work and think that it would be influenced by anything improper. Planning for the Aspen interview. Axelrod told the IOG that the quote-unquote game plan that emerged from these discussions was for Lynch to explain publicly how the Midyear investigation had been handled all along. It was handled by career agents and prosecutors. The career agents and prosecutors had been the ones doing the work for more than a year. When the career agents and prosecutors finished their work, they would make a recommendation to the department leadership, and when Lynch received that recommendation, she described this process in her interview with the Washington Post reporter discussed below, led to some confusion. Carlin spoke at the Aspen Ideas Festival before Lynch arrived and said he was scheduled to return to Washington, D.C. with her. Carlin said that he met with Lynch, her husband, and her staff in person before her interview with the Washington Post reporter, and Carlin conveyed to her that NSD was not making a request that she recuse herself. Carlin said they also discussed what Lynch planned to say in her interview. Like Axelrod, Carlin told us that Lynch intended to provide more insight than she normally would into the investigative process, not to communicate that something had changed because of the tarmac incident. Melanie Newman told the OIG that she had made it known that she disagreed with this approach from a messaging perspective. Newman said that she thought recusal was appropriate because public statements and actions, quote, need to be clear-cut, unquote. Newman stated, "We've tried to have it both ways. We said that she would accept the recommendation of the senior career prosecutors and investigators on the case. Well, usually that is what the Attorney General does anyway. That means literally nothing. This is the Attorney General. I'm not aware of. There may be disputes in other cases between the FBI and the prosecutors that the Attorney General is sort of the deciding vote. But generally speaking, in charging decisions, the Attorney General accepts the recommendations of those people who know the evidence most intimately. And I think in the rare instance that there are disagreements, the Attorney General may accept the recommendation of one over the other, for example, but that's sort of what they do." Newman said that Lynch was doing the same thing that she usually does, except that, quote, she was saying before the conclusion of the investigation that this was how she was going to handle it. That was the difference, unquote. Lynch's July 1st Aspen Institute statement. During the interview with the Washington Post reporter, Lynch acknowledged that her meeting with former President Clinton raised questions about her role in the Midyear investigation. Addressing how that investigation would be resolved, Lynch stated, "But I think the issue is again, what is my role and how that matter is going to be resolved? And so let me be clear on how that is going to be resolved. I've gotten that question a lot also over time, and we usually don't go into these deliberations, but I think it's important that people see what the process is like. As I have always indicated, the matter is being handled by career agents and investigators with the Department of Justice." The matter. There's that, she said she never told Comey to call it a matter. Sure, here she is calling it a matter right there. So which is it, Lynch? "They've had it since the beginning. They are independent. It predates my tenure as Attorney General. It is the same team, and they're acting independently. They follow the law, they follow the facts. That team will make findings. That is to say, they will come up with a chronology of what happened, the factual scenario. They will make recommendations as to how to resolve what those facts lead to. The recommendations will be reviewed by career supervisors in the Department of Justice and in the FBI and by the FBI Director. And then, as is the common process, they present it to me, and I fully expect to accept their recommendations." Lynch then responded to a question about a news article that morning that she planned to recuse herself from the Midyear investigation. She stated, "Well, a recusal would mean that I wouldn't even be briefed on what the findings were or what the actions going forward would be. And while I don't have a role in those findings and coming up with those findings or making those recommendations as to how to go forward, I'll be briefed on it and I will be accepting their recommendations." Well, that's a completely nonsensical statement. As the discussion continued, Lynch responded to additional questions about her continued role in Midyear. Asked about a news report that she had made the decision In April 2016 to accept the recommendations of career staff, Lynch replied, "Yes, I had already determined that that would be the process. And as I've said on occasions, as to why we don't talk about ongoing investigations in terms of what's being discussed and who's being interviewed, is to preserve the integrity of that investigation. We also typically don't talk about the process by which we make decisions, and I have provided that response too. But in this situation, because I did have that meeting, it has raised concerns, I feel, and I feel that while I can certainly say this matter is going to be handled like any other, as it always has been, it's going to be resolved like any other, as it was always going to be. I think people need the information about exactly how that resolution will come about in order to know what that means and really accept that and have faith in the ultimate decision of the Department of Justice." Again, gobbledygook. Lynch's comments about the status of her continuing involvement in the Midyear investigation created considerable confusion. After her appearance, various news articles reported that she had decided to defer the recommendations of the FBI or had effected a quote-unquote non-recusal. Lynch said she participated in a follow-up interview with the Washington Post reporter during which she attempted to clarify her statement. The resulting article quoted her as follows: "I can certainly say this matter is going to be handled like any other, as it always has been. It's going to be resolved like any other, as it was always going to be. I've always said that this matter will be handled by the career people who are independent. They live from administration to administration. Their role is to follow the facts and follow the law and make a determination as to what happened and what those next steps should be. This team is dedicated and professional, so I can't imagine a circumstance in which I would not be accepting their recommendations." Lynch told us that her role in oversight of the Midyear investigation did not change. She stated, "As I said to the reporter at the time, that the team is going to continue and to do what they needed to do in terms of interviews, forensics, all the investigative steps that they would take that were not influenced by me. They would look at all the facts, all the evidence, and come up with a recommendation that was going to be vetted through supervisors on both sides of the House, the legal side of the House, the investigative side of the House, and they would make a recommendation to me." Excuse me. Thanks. Lynch continued, "They are going to present me with a recommendation that I expect to accept, which I always expected that I would accept given the people involved in the process, and then there is really no need for me to step aside from this because I'm listening to their recommendation. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do in terms of discharging my duties in running the department, in managing the department in what is an important case and a sensitive case, and essentially there won't be a change." Impact of the tarmac meeting on Comey's decision to make a public statement. This is huge. As described above, Comey began drafting a public statement announcing the conclusion of the Midyear investigation in early May 2016, well before the tarmac meeting, and told the OIG that he planned not to inform the department. Comey told us that he had struggled with the decision and that, quote, "in a way, the tarmac thing made it easy for me," unquote, and, quote unquote, tipped the scales towards making his mind up to go forward with an independent announcement. He stated, "I think I was nearly there, that I would have to do this separate and apart. And so I would say was 90% there, the highly likely going to do it anyway, and the tarmac meeting capped it." Comey said that Lynch's decision not to recuse herself and to defer to his recommendation impacted his decision. He stated, "If you believe the nature, the circumstance, 500-year flood, if you believe that it's officially unusual that you can't participate meaningfully in one of the most important investigations in your organization, then I think your obligation is to find another way to discharge leadership responsibilities. Either appoint someone within the organization to be in charge of the case to make sure there is leadership to engage across the street with us, not to be this neither fish nor fowl. I'm still the Attorney General, and in really an odd way." Wait a minute. I'm still the Attorney General, and really in an odd way, which she explicitly was sort of the culture of the case before the tarmac thing? I don't get the "I'm still the Attorney General." This is James Comey talking. I'll read it one more time. "I'm still the Attorney General, and really in an odd way, What she said explicitly was sort of the culture of the case before the tarmac thing, in that she was not closely involved with the investigation, which was, I'm the Attorney General, and that's not really my thing, and then she made it explicit by saying, I'm still the Attorney General, but I'm going to accept what Jim Comey and the prosecutors say. All right, I guess that made sense. Took a little while. Comey also stated, had Loretta said, I'm stepping out of this after the tarmac meeting, I'm making Sally Yates the acting Attorney General, and I had gone and sat down with Sally and heard her vision for it, maybe we would have ended up in a different place. I don't know. It's possible we'd end up in the same place, but it's hard to relive different imaginary lives. As described in more detail in Chapter 8, on October 13, 2016, Comey gave a speech at the SAC conference in which he spoke at length about the mid-year investigation. Comey stated the following regarding the tarmac meeting in explaining his decision to deliver a unilateral public statement. At the end of the investigation, the team's view of it was there isn't anything that anybody could prosecute. My view is the same. Everybody between me and the people who worked this case felt the same way about it. It was not a prosecutable case. The decision there was not a prosecutable case here was not a hard one. The hard one, as I told you, was how do we communicate about it? I decided to do something unprecedented that I was very nervous about at the time, and I've asked myself 1,000 times since, was it the right decision? I still believe it was. Of course you do. You are your own best fan. You are your own greatest hero. Anything you do is the right thing, the best thing, the most terrific thing, the big league thing, James. Here was the thinking, especially after the Attorney General met with former President Clinton on that airplane the week before we interviewed Hillary Clinton. The hard part in the wake of the Attorney General's meeting was what would happen to the FBI if we did the normal thing. The normal thing would be to send over an LHM even if we didn't write it. Go talk to them. Tell them what we think. Tell them whether we think there's something here or whether we think a declination makes sense. But all of that would be done privately. What I said to myself at the time, we talked about it as leadership team a lot, and all believed that this was the right course. Try to imagine what will happen to the FBI if we do the normal thing. Then what will happen to us is the Department of Justice will screw around it for Lord knows how long, issue probably a one-sentence declination, and then the world will catch on fire, and then the cry in the public will be, where on earth is the FBI? How could the FBI be part of some corrupt political bargain like this? There's no transparency whatsoever. Where is the FBI? Where is the FBI? Then, after a period of many weeks where a corrosive doubt about us leaks into the public square, then I'd have to testify in exactly the way I did before. Our view of it will be dragged out in that way, in a way I think would have hugely damaging to us. That's what it says. In a way I think would have hugely damaging to us, and frankly to the Justice Department more broadly, and for the sense of justice in the country more broadly. And you upheld the integrity of the FBI so well, James, that the Congressional Committee looking into the Mueller investigation is looking to indict your former deputy. And you are on the hot seat. In fact, this IG report right here really lays you out to dry. So nice job, James. Nice job. July 5, 2015 press conference. Notifications to department leadership. On July 1, 2016, Comey emailed Rybicki a script containing what he planned to say to Lynch and Yates on the morning of July 5, entitled, What I Will Say Tuesday on Phone. The script stated, I wanted to let you know that I am doing a press conference this morning announcing the completion of our mid-year investigation and referral of the matter to DOJ. I'm not going to tell you anything about what I will say for reasons I hope you understand. I think it is very important that I not have coordinated my statement outside the FBI. I'm not going to take questions at the press conference. When it is over, my staff will be available to work with your team. What balls? Excuse me the language, but what brass ones. Rybicki told the OIG that Comey wanted to quote-unquote be very careful about what he said on the phone to avoid substantive discussion before the actual press conference, and that was why he wrote out what he planned to say. Rybicki said that Comey did not deliver the script verbatim during his calls to Lynch and Yates, but that it was close to what he actually said. Comey and Rybicki also developed a timeline for notifying the media, the department, and Congress about the press conference. After notifying the press pool and sending out a media advisory by 8 a.m., Comey planned to call Yates at 8:30 a.m. and Lynch at 8:35 a.m. After those calls took place, McCabe, Rybicki, and Strzok were assigned to call Toscas, Axelrod, and Loftman respectively, beginning at 8:30. The timeline is set forth below in Figure 1. It's something you can look at. It's on page 222. It's easy enough to remember. Basically, it goes down who's going to be notified when during the before and after the press conference, and there's a pretty good list of people. Emails indicate that the department first learned about Comey's press conference as the result of the media notifications on the morning of July 5, not from Comey or Rybicki. At 8:08 a.m., Melanie Newman sent an email to Lynch's acting chief of staff, Axelrod, and Lynch's deputy chief of staff entitled FBI Presser at 11 a.m. This email stated, "Just heard that the director is having a press briefing today at 11 a.m. I have not heard anything, but have asked for guidance." Axelrod replied at 8:15 a.m., "I'll call Rybicki." At 8:16 a.m., apparently after talking to the FBI Office of Public Affairs, Newman stated, "The FBI OPA section chief says that the director has called the DAG." Axelrod replied at 8:18 a.m., "Nope." At 8:31 a.m., Axelrod replied again and stated, "They just spoke. He's going to call the AG soon." Newman emailed Axelrod and Lynch's acting chief of staff with additional information at 8:33 and 8:43 a.m. She stated in the first email, "For the record, these notifications to Lynch and Yates are happening after they notified press. I learned from a reporter that they were requesting pool coverage, which means they want live TV." In the second email, she stated, "They are also doing an off-the-record call this morning." Newman told the OIG that in the weeks leading up to July 5, she had been clamoring for information from Axelrod about the conclusion of the investigation so that she could get some sense of the timeline. She said she had been, quote-unquote, hearing what was likely to announce something. Hearing from reporters that the investigation was coming to an end and the FBI was likely to announce something. She said that Axelrod assured her that the FBI would not announce a conclusion without the department and that they were not at the point where they were ready to announce anything and that he would tell her when they were. Newman told the OIG that she did not doubt that Axelrod, quote-unquote, believed this to be true. Newman said that on the morning of July 5, after she found out from a reporter that the FBI would hold a press conference that day, she called the FBI OPA section chief to inquire about it and was told, "I can't tell you what this is about, but I'm sure you can guess." According to Newman, the department's OPA had long-standing problems getting information from FBI OPA, but this was, quote-unquote, unprecedented and absolutely ridiculous. Call to Yates. Comey said that when he spoke with Yates, he told her he was about to make a public press statement about the email investigation, including that the FBI had finished it and was sending it to the department with its recommendation. Comey told the OIG that Yates did not say anything except, "Thanks for letting me know." According to contemporaneous emails, both Yates and Axelrod were notified by the FBI by 8:28 a.m. Yates told us that she remembered Comey saying that he was going to hold a press conference that morning. She said that she did not recall if Comey said that it would be about the Clinton investigation, but that she knew it would be. She stated, "And I remember thinking sort of, what the heck is this? And hanging up immediately and calling Matt Axelrod to find out more of what he knew, because if there's anybody who's going to know what's going on, it's going to be Matt." She said that Comey's tone during the call was very emphatic. "I'm not going to tell you what it is," and that made her determined to find some other way to find out what Comey planned to say. Yates said that she and Axelrod assumed that Comey would deliver a very brief statement that the FBI had concluded the Clinton investigation and had reached a determination and possibly would state what the FBI's recommendation to the department was going to be. She said, based on her knowledge of the investigation, they expected that if Comey announced her recommendation, it would be a declination. She stated, but we certainly didn't expect what then happened. She said that she viewed Comey's decision to do a press statement without coordinating with the department as problematic, particularly the failure to coordinate on the content of the statement. We discuss Yates' reaction to the content of Comey's statement in more detail below. Axelrod said that he was surprised that Comey had chosen to do an independent press statement. He said he thought that the statement should have been, quote, coordinated and planned and discussed with the department. However, at the time, he did not view the fact that Comey was the one delivering the declination as the primary problem. He stated, I think it's important to think about Comey's press conference in two ways. One was the decision to do it, and then two was what he said. One was the decision to do it at all. And on the decision to do it at all, I mean, we're surprised. We were like completely taken aback. But again, we had already wanted the FBI to at least be, even before the tarmac, be part of the public face of this. Comey was about to be the entire public face of it. But there were some upsides and downsides to that, but it wasn't all bad. As described in more detail below, Axelrod thought that the content of Comey's statement was misleading and that the way Comey executed the press conference hurt the perception of the integrity of the investigation in a significant way. But that's not how Comey saw it. Comey saw himself as the savior of the investigation. He knew he was doing the right thing, especially because he knew if he had bounced that off the Department of Justice, they would have told him not to do it. But he did it anyway. Axelrod said that he and Yates did not discuss ordering Comey not to make the statement, and Axelrod stated, I don't recall that being discussed, because I don't think that would have been tenable, right? The press was already coming, and ordering director not to do something can be very fraught, and so I don't recall that being a discussion. Call to Lynch. At 8:24 a.m., Lynch's acting chief of staff, after being told by Newman about the notice of the FBI press conference, sent an email to Axelrod asking, please call my cell when you are done with Rybicki. At 8:39 a.m., the acting chief of staff sent the following email to Lynch. AG, you are about to receive a call from the director. Please give me a call on my cell, and I can fill you in as to what it's about. Alternatively, I will be in the office in about 5 to 10 minutes and will stop by. Comey said that he called Lynch that morning and told her that he was going to make a public press statement about the email investigation and that the FBI had completed the investigation and was sending it to the department with its recommendation. Comey stated that Lynch asked him, can you tell me what your recommendation is going to be? He said that he replied, I can't, and I hope someday you'll understand why, but I can't answer any of your questions. I can't answer any questions. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to say. Rybicki told us that Comey called from Rybicki's office because of the snafus with connecting the calls and provided us with a similar account of what Comey said. Can you imagine having the cojones to tell the Attorney General, the head of the Department of Justice, I'm doing it my way, and I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing? That's Comey in a nutshell. Lynch told the OIG that she was in her office when Comey called her. She said that he told her he was going to make a public statement, quote-unquote, very soon, and that it would be about the email investigation. She described the call as follows. And I said, when are you proposing to do this? And he said, very soon, within a few moments. I don't recall if he said 10, but I'm certain it was a short time period. And then he said, and I'm not going to discuss the contents with you because I think it's best if we are able to say that we did not coordinate the statement. Then I said something. I had another question. I don't recall whether I said, what is it about? I don't recall my other question. And he said, it's going to be about the email investigation. Lynch said that he gave her no further indication about the substance of his statement. She said that Comey told her he was not going to go over the statement with her so that they both could say it was not coordinated. Asked whether this language raised a red flag indicating that she should find out more or tell him to stop, Lynch said it did not, because it did not occur to her that Comey would talk about the end of the investigation or the FBI's recommendation. She stated, and certainly I did not, at that time, on that day, even though I knew that they had interviewed the secretary, I don't think that I had a view that the investigation was done at that point. Lynch told the OIG that, had she known what Comey was going to do, she would have told him to stop. She said she also would have asked him, "Why would you want to do this?" She stated, "Ultimately, announcing the end of a matter, whether it's going to be how we will resolve it, would not be something that I would ever think that the investigative side would do, which is why that was not what I thought he was going to do." James Comey is a surprising individual. Notifications to NSD. At 8:28 a.m., McCabe and Strzok received notice that Axelrod and Yates had been notified, which served as the green light for them to contact Toscas and Loftman respectively. At 8:33 a.m., McCabe sent an email to Toscas stating, "The director just informed the DAG that at 11 o'clock this morning he has convened a press conference to announce the completion of our investigation and the referral to DOJ. He will not tell her what he is going to say. It is important that he not coordinate his statement in any way. He will not take questions at the conference. His next call is to the AG. I wanted you to hear this from me. I understand this will be troubling to the team, and I very much regret that. I wanted to talk to you after the Principals Committee, and am happy to bring my folks over to DOJ this afternoon to discuss the next steps. After we have completely cut your knees out from underneath you, then we'll talk about what to do next." Man, the FBI. McCabe said that he called Toscas, but Toscas was traveling, so instead he sent Toscas an email. At 8:53 a.m., Toscas sent an email to Carlin, Loftman, and Mary McCord stating, I'm on hold to talk to the DD right now. I received a message from him a few minutes ago saying that this morning the directors informed the DAG that he will have a press conference at 11 a.m. today to announce the completion of the FBI's investigation and the referral to DOJ. He will not take questions at the conference, but he is not coordinating his statement with us. I'll call when I get off the phone. According to Loftman's notes, Toscas then held a conference call with McCord, Loftman, and prosecutors 1 and 2. According to these notes, Toscas told the group that he had spoken with McCabe and learned that Comey planned to hold a press conference at 11 a.m. to announce the conclusion of the investigation and the FBI's recommendation to the department. The note stated, Director has told AG plus DAG. McCabe refused to convey substance. Director doesn't want statement to appear coordinated with DOJ. Well, you accomplished that, James. Loftman's notes also stated that even though McCabe said that he would not share the content of Comey's planned statement, McCabe told Casas that Comey planned to talk for 10 to 15 minutes and would say what the FBI had done, what the FBI had found, and what the FBI's recommendation to the Attorney General and the department would be. Finally, the notes indicate that Toscas spoke to Carlin, and Carlin said not to discuss with OAG or ODAG in advance. Other notes obtained by the OIG indicate that Loftman separately spoke to Strzok at 8:35 a.m. that morning. 8:35 a.m. that morning. That's a little redundant. According to these notes, Strzok called Loftman and said that he was told to call him and say, quote, that Comey would hold a press conference at 11 a.m. that morning. These notes indicate that Loftman asked, what exactly will he say? And Strzok replied, Midyear. The notes also indicate that the 7th floor has told AG-DAG. Reaction to the statement. Comey held his press conference at 11 a.m. on July 5, 2016. He delivered the final version of his statement verbatim, provided as Attachment D to this report, and did not take any questions. In this section, we describe reactions to his statement within the department. 1. Department and NSD leadership. Lynch told the OIG that she watched Comey's statement on the television in her office. She described her thoughts as she watched Comey speak. Discussing findings in something that was technically not closed was, I was a little stunned actually. I had no way to stop him at that point. I mean, short of, dashing across the street and unplugging something. But so, as he went further into the analysis of not only what they found, but what they recommended, I thought this was done to protect the image of the FBI because of the perception that somehow the FBI was not going to be allowed to have their views known or their views expressed or their views respected within the process. Because that in fact had been for those of us who were inside the department at the time, and I don't know how the FBI was taking it at the time, but certainly if you looked at criticism aimed at the department, people said, oh yeah, the AG was appointed by Bill Clinton to be U.S. Attorney. But that was never the real stated concern. It was that there was going to be, these strong investigators who wanted to bring charges who would somehow be silenced or stepped on by the legal side of the House. Whether it was the political side or the career side, they never really made much of a differentiation. Easy to attach it to the political side if you're talking to the AG, but that was really something that was thrown around a lot in debate outside of the department. So I viewed it as him trying to make his recommendation clear so that, and when he made the recommendation clear and said, this is our recommendation, I remember wondering, does the team know that this is happening, that the literal investigative team, both sides of it? Did George Taskus know this was going to happen? Who knew that this was going to occur? And why didn't we know in advance, meaning the fifth floor, myself, the DAG? Why weren't we informed in advance of this? So those are my thoughts during the press conference. During watching of that particular press conference. Lynch said that she thought that the strongest public concern was about the mid-year investigation was not that she, as the Attorney General, was going to quote-unquote kill it, but that the investigative side would want to charge somebody and the legal side would say no for political reasons. She said that she viewed Comey's public statement as, quote, basically saying, look, we're independent, we aren't influenced by anybody, and now no one is also silencing us, unquote. Lynch stated that she did not ascribe malicious intent to Comey, but thought that his statement was a, quote, huge mistake, unquote. Lynch told the OIG that she did not think that the FBI's recommendation should have been made public, quote, because we don't make those things public. That's part of the discussion that we, agents and prosecutors, have. That's part of, we can talk about it, we can argue about it, we can go back and forth about it. Yates told the OIG that she had concerns about the substance of Comey's statement as she watched the press conference. She stated, and while I can't point to specific facts in Jim Comey's description, narrative description there that I would say were inaccurate, I also remember at the time thinking the facts as those are being laid out with much more censure than the facts as I understood them to be and how I had been briefed on this matter. Sort of by way of example, I don't recall Jim going through and explaining that there were no classification markings on the vast majority of emails, We got 3 email chains with the small c indicating that the information was confidential, not the top secret or anything on there, that it was all to people within the State Department. That were really, to me, gave the most accurate picture of what the facts actually were there. And so I was stunned, A, at the level of details that he went into, B, that he then made judgments and said things like extremely careless, and you should have known that this material was. You should have known that this material was. There should be a what in there. And anyone should know that you shouldn't have it on a private server. That he gave the impression that, the private server could have been hacked. We don't really know for sure. That, I thought wasn't really a balanced description of what the facts were here. And so, there are a number of things that are concerning about that. One, that he sort of put that slant on it, that it was done without any consultation with folks at Main Justice. That impugned someone we weren't charging. We don't trash people we're not charging, and we don't get to just make value or moral judgments about their conduct. And there were things in there that I thought were unnecessary from a factual, they were in opinion, as opposed to laying out, even if he was going to do this, what was a fair, even-handed recitation of what the facts were. And I thought that was way out of order. Asked what her reaction was when she looked back on the statement, Yates said that she was even more stunned. She stated, at the time all of this is happening, it's such a swirl. The tarmac happens and trying to figure out what to happen. I mean, all of this is happening so quickly and in such a charged environment, it's hard for it all to fully sink in like it does when you look at it then in the calm of the day in retrospect on that. And look, it was a difficult decision with the tarmac, but that's not something I think was appropriate for the FBI director to unilaterally then decide how he was going to handle that. I think that was a factor that we should consider in how we were going to publicly convey the results of the investigation. And certainly, if he had views about how that ought to happen, I think he should speak up and should convey those views. But to make the unilateral decision to do is one thing. And then to put out that level of detail without coordinating that with the DOJ, or DOJ agreeing with that, and then for it to be with a slant that I didn't think was accurate, and I'm not saying he did that intentionally, I don't know. I certainly wouldn't accuse anybody of that, but the way it was conveyed, I didn't think he gave the most accurate description. And then, as I said, imputing someone that we weren't charging with sort of personal judgments. Take a drink here, excuse me. Axelrod stated that he and Yates watched the press conference in her office. He said that he was pretty confident in what Comey was going to conclude based on what they had been led to believe about the investigation and did not fully process the content of the statement while Comey was delivering it. He said that he reacted more negatively to the statement after attending the briefing by prosecutors the next day. I don't know all the facts because we were giving George Toscas the space to tell us what we thought we needed to know. We were not in the weeds. And the next day when we got the briefing on some of the stuff in the weeds that were important facts that the NSD guys briefed the AG on that were absent from Comey's statement. And so that was when I started to have a much more strongly negative reaction to what Comey had said. Asked what facts were missing that he thought were important, Axelrod identified the following, a couple. One, that according to the NSD guys, and what I recall from their briefing, is that if you look at the spectrum of cases that the department has brought in the past historically in this area, the department has never brought a case where the classified information was shared between people who work for the government. It was always someone sharing classified information with someone outside of the government. That's a pretty important fact. What about the submarine guy? He didn't publish those pictures. Those pictures weren't published until someone retrieved the camera, and then they were shown that he'd taken pictures inside the sub. And he went to jail for it. I don't see how you could make that statement. It was always someone sharing classified information with someone outside of the government. That's a pretty important fact. That if you are laying out your reasons for recommending declining prosecution, that's to me a pretty important one. The other one I recall was that the NSD guy said most of the emails were, I think whether it was all or most, the majority of the emails that turned out to be classified have been sent late at night or on the weekends, which, to me means it's people sort of trying to, or not at their desks, right, where they have access to classified systems trying to talk about, talk around or talk about issues. So I thought that was a really important fact. And again, just when you're talking about intent, right, that's an important thing that bears on intent. Axelrod contrasted Comey's statement with the briefing by the prosecutors the following day, which he characterized as a, quote, much more complete picture, unquote. He stated, quote, when the prosecutors were done talking, the reaction was like, oh, this is clearly a declination. When Comey was done talking, as I think you saw from the public reaction, it was much more of a mixed bag, unquote. Axelrod told the OIG that the way the press conference was executed hurt the perception of the integrity of the investigation in a significant way. He stated, because if the goal to do what he did the goal would need to be, and I would imagine his goal was that by the time he's done talking, that even if people don't agree with the outcome, they can see why, understand his thinking and see why he got to the place he got. And that would sort of be like a closing argument or something, right? It would be, right, here's the rationale, and I've seen the facts, and here's why I'm coming out the way I'm coming out. And people, again, and for the partisans and the people with political agendas, they're not going to be convinced. But that reasonable center would say okay, yeah, we get it. That was not the reaction to the statement, which I think just by its own terms means the execution failed, because it raised a lot of questions. It was much more of a, like I said, the difference in tone and emphasis between what he said and then what we heard in the AG's office the next morning was striking to me. And I think if he had, if the folks who gave the briefing the next day were the ones who, obviously not the ones those words had been said at the press conference, I think it would have been received quite differently. Toscas told the OIG that his initial reaction to Comey's statement was, holy cow, like they, Axelrod, and the FBI were talking about doing a joint appearance or statement of some sort, and he's just doing it all on his own. Tosca said that he had concerns about Comey's statement, both the substance of it and the fact that it deviated from department practice. He stated, "We don't say we're closing something, but let me tell you some bad stuff that we saw along the way, but it doesn't rise to the level of bringing a case. We just don't do it. I don't know whether you can point back to a document someplace, but after doing this for almost 24 years, somehow it's ingrained in me, and it appears to be ingrained in everyone around me, and everyone who does this, whether they're new or veterans. It's just something you don't do. You do not. It's the same reason why, if, for example, and we have these discussions in some cases, if you go get a search warrant and it's under seal, and the search warrant you're seeing Tom, there's probable cause that Tom committed, fill in the blank, whatever horrible crime you want, or a lesser crime. You can do your search. There's no case, there's no prosecution. It never comes. You know it never leads to a prosecutable case. You don't unseal that warrant and tell the public, hey, there's probable cause that Tom is, engages in child pornography, or we suspect him of a bank robbery. You just don't do it. And so it's the same type of principle. When you decide you're not proceeding, you say nothing more. I get that in some instances there's going to be a lot of public knowledge of the facts. A shooting, for example, where the public has seen what happened, so they already know of actual conduct, whether it's criminal or not, is different. So you could say we're not bringing a charge, but still comment on what everyone has seen. But that's not what this was, and people could have tried to guess or, surmise what the actual exchanges were in some instances, or what the particular parts of the classified information were. But I just didn't see it as something that it did not square with the way we would normally operate. Tosca said that Comey's decision to do the statement seemed quote-unquote beyond strange and quote-unquote incredibly dangerous, considering the ongoing campaign and the proximity to the election. Asked whether extremely careless was too similar to gross negligence, Tosca said that it was. Tosca said that once Comey was getting grilled about gross negligence, it must have become obvious they chose words that were so similar to the statutory language that they, quote, created friction in being able to explain his ultimate decision, unquote. He told the OIG he did not know how Comey's lawyers missed this issue and that statements would have benefited from legal review by prosecutors. Toscas did not have a problem with Comey's statement that, quote, no reasonable prosecutor, unquote, would bring a case. He stated, that didn't bother me at all. This is the man who was the Deputy Attorney General of our country. He ran this department. He was a lifelong prosecutor. I had no problem with that. I know other people do because they say, oh, he's usurping authority and things like that. But I think he is perfectly qualified, and regardless of his position, even in private practice or as a citizen, a private citizen, he could say that, and I think it has credibility. Yeah, but he wasn't a private citizen. He was the head of the FBI, and he completely undercut the DOJ's authority in making this statement and outlaying the quote-unquote facts the way he saw them. I think you're being really nice to him. However, Tosca's expressed concerns about the downstream effect of Comey's deviation from department practice in making a public statement in July, which he said then impacted Comey's decisions in October. We'll discuss these concerns in Chapter 10. Prosecutors. As described above, Prosecutors 1 and 2 learned about Comey's plan to hold a press conference as a result of McCabe's call to Toscas and Strzok's call to Loffman. Strzok also spoke directly to Prosecutor 1 that morning. Prosecutor 1 said that he was, quote, extremely angry, unquote, on the phone and pressed Strzok to tell him what Comey planned to say, but that Strzok flatly refused and said he was not allowed to tell him. Following this call, Prosecutor 1 contacted Prosecutors 3 and 4 and informed them that Comey planned to hold a press conference that morning. The prosecutors had varying reactions to the substance of Comey's statement. Prosecutor 4 told the OIG that he was surprised at how strong Comey's quote-unquote no reasonable prosecutor language was, and by the inclusion of negative commentary about former Secretary Clinton's conduct, but that he did not recall hearing anything factually inaccurate in the statement. Prosecutors 1, 2, and 3 identified substantive concerns with Comey's statement. Prosecutor 1 highlighted Comey's negative comments about former Secretary Clinton, characterizing them as, quote, declining to prosecute someone and then sort of dirtying them up with facts that you develop along the way, unquote. Prosecutor 1 also said that the use of extremely careless to describe her conduct, quote, begs questions about gross negligence, unquote, that could have been avoided if the statement were more carefully crafted. Prosecutor 2 thought the statement was, quote-unquote, totally unfair on many levels, particularly the discussion of uncharged conduct, and that the characterizations of the evidence in the statement was, quote-unquote, very skewed. Prosecutors 3 and 4 said they had concerns about Comey's use of, quote, extremely careless, unquote, to describe former Secretary Clinton's conduct in the statement. On July 6, 2016, Prosecutor 3 sent the following email to Prosecutors 1, 2, and 4. It's unfortunate that Comey didn't differentiate the standard of proof between 793F and the other statutes. He glossed over all with mention of the absence of intent and made no mention of the necessity of proving knowledge of classified information with regard to 793F and why that proof was deficient. By using the phrase extremely careless, he lit up the talking heads last night, many of whom opined that such verbiage warranted a gross negligence charge and that Comey was giving Clinton an unwarranted pass. Even the so-called legal experts didn't seem to understand the elements of that statute and why it did not apply to the facts. In his OIG interview, Prosecutor 3 said that he thought Comey's remarks had a good assessment of the investigation, but that he should have better articulated the gross negligence provision, quote, because that seemed to draw a lot of fire from the public, unquote. Prosecutor 3 said that Comey's statement did not explain well enough that under the gross negligence provision, quote, you have to know you're being careless with what is in fact classified information, unquote. You're going to have a hard time proving to me that Clinton did not know what she was doing. I'm guessing here that the report is ultimately going to say that they had no solid proof that Clinton was screwing up. I disagree with that completely, but that's my lens, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm probably going to argue that position till the day I die. I don't see this report as settling things as much as people had hoped, but you're going to have to accept it. That's how I see it. You're going to have to accept it. In his OIG interview, Prosecutor 3 said that he thought Comey's remarks had a good assessment of the investigation, but he should have better articulated. I'm sorry, I just read that. Excuse me. On August 2nd, 2016, Loughman sent an email to FBI Attorney 1 in connection with draft FBI responses to congressional inquiries that had been made to Comey and copied Toscas and the NSD prosecutors and supervisors on the email. Loughman stated the following about Comey's July 5 statement. We appreciate the Bureau sending us its draft response to the inquiries Director Comey received from Congress. We assume you have already considered and rejected simply responding to the letters, which were sent before the Director's congressional testimony, by referring the committees to the Director's lengthy congressional testimony. As the Director has publicly stated, the Bureau did not coordinate the Director's public statements about this case, many of which are repeated in the Bureau's draft response, with the Justice Department, and we therefore did not have an opportunity to express our views about those statements in advance. As I'm sure you understand, some of the Director's statements went beyond the types of statements that we, as prosecutors, would typically make in a case where no charges were brought, ergo, characterizing uncharged conduct of individuals within the scope of the investigation. While we understand and respect the Director's reasons for departing from normal practice in this one instance, we, of course, have not departed from our practice of refraining from making such statements, and we do not want to be perceived as concurring in or adopting such statements. Congressional testimony explaining the July 5 statement. July 7, 2016. 2 days after his statement on July 7, 2016, Comey testified for several hours before the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. During this hearing, Comey was asked numerous questions about the basis for the decision to recommend declining prosecution of former Secretary Clinton and whether there was evidence that former Secretary Clinton violated any criminal statutes, including the gross negligence provision in 18 U.S.C. 793F. He was also asked about the specific language used in his statement. In response to a question about the meaning of extremely careless, Comey stated, I intended it as a common sense term. Someone who should know better, someone who is demonstrating a lack of care that strikes me as, there's ordinary accidents and then there's just real sloppiness. So I kind of think of that as real sloppiness. Thank you, Director of the FBI and former prosecutor. You nailed it. Representative John Mica noted the proximity of the tarmac incident on June 27, Lynch's announcement that she would defer to the FBI on July 1st, Comey's statement on the morning of July 5, and former Secretary Clinton's campaign appearance with then President Obama on the afternoon of July 5. In response to a series of questions about the circumstances of his statement, Comey responded, "Look me in the eye and listen to what I'm about to say. I did not coordinate my statement with anyone. The White House, the Department of Justice, nobody outside the FBI family had any idea what I was about to say. I say that under oath. I stand by that. There was no coordination." Comey also testified that there was no interference or attempt to influence the investigation by then President Obama, the Clinton campaign, or former Secretary Clinton herself. Could have mentioned Loretta Lynch in there. That might have helped. I can't believe that he actually feels that that statement was a bold and proper move. It was idiocy. It was pure idiocy. Yet he, again, Comey is his own best PR person. Comey also was asked questions about his reasons for doing an independent press conference. In response to a question about whether the system was rigged, Comey stated, "I get a 10-year term to ensure that I stay outside of politics, but in a way that it's easy. I lead an organization that is resolutely apolitical. We are tough, aggressive people. If we can make a case, we'll make a case. We do not care what the person's stripes are or what their bank account looks like. And I worry very much when people doubt that. It's the reason I did the press conference 2 days ago. I care about the FBI's reputation. I care about the Justice Department. I care about the whole system deeply. And so I decided I'm going to do something no director's ever done before. I'm not going to tell the Attorney General or anybody else what I'm going to say, or even that I'm going to say it. They did not know, nor did the media know until I walked out, what I was going to talk about. And then I offered extraordinary transparency, which I'm sure confused and bugged a lot of people." Yeah, James, it was the transparency. Responding to another question about his statement, Comey stated, "Everything I did would have been done privately in the normal course. We have great conversations between the FBI and prosecutors. We make recommendations. We argue back and forth. What I decided to do was offer transparency to the American people about the whys of that, what I was going to do, because I thought it was very, very important for their confidence in the system of justice, and within that, their confidence in the FBI. And I was very concerned that if I didn't show that transparency, that in that lack of transparency, people would say, gee, what is going on here? Something seems squirrely here. So I said I would do something unprecedented because I think it is an unprecedented situation. Now the director who is criminally investigating one of the two candidates for the president may find him or herself bound by my precedent. Okay, so if that happens in the next 100 years, they'll have to deal with what I did. So I decided it was worth doing." What an egomaniac. My God. How did Trump keep him on for as long as he did? Either expediency, or he wanted to appear that he wasn't interrupting any investigations. That's all I can think of, because obviously Comey is just outside the bounds of reality. September 28, 2016. Okay, I'm gonna pause there. I'm gonna take a 10-minute break. I will be back at let's see, it's 10 after now, so I'll be back at 20 after. I'll put the resume sign up, and I will see you soon. And we're back. As you can see, I took the opportunity to change clothes. I'd been in the same outfit for about 20 hours, so I figured enough was enough. Okay, back to it. September 28, 2016. Comey also testified in an oversight hearing before the House Judiciary Committee on September 28, 2016, several weeks after the FBI released various materials from the Midyear investigation to Congress and in response to Freedom of Information Act requests. During this hearing, Comey answered questions about the conduct of the Midyear investigation, including questions about the reliance on voluntary production of information, the destruction of devices used by former Secretary Clinton, decisions to grant immunity to witnesses, and the interpretation of the gross negligence provision. Comey was asked again about the independence of the investigation. Representative Steve King asked about the interview of former Secretary Clinton and whether, quote, Loretta Lynch had her people in there, quote unquote. Comey responded, "There was no advice to me from the Attorney General or any of the lawyers working for her. My team formulated a recommendation that was communicated to me, and the FBI reached its conclusion as to what to do uncoordinated from the Department of Justice." Asked whether he was responsible for the decision to decline prosecution, Comey said that the decision to decline was made in the department, but acknowledged that there was, quote, virtually zero chance, unquote, that the department would make a different decision once Comey had made his recommendation public. He stated, "But part of my decision was based on my prediction that there was no way the Department of Justice would prosecute on these facts in any event." Importantly, at the September 28 hearing, Comey was asked, "Would you reopen the Clinton investigation if you discovered new information that was both relevant and substantial?" Comey answered, "It is hard for me to answer in the abstract. We would certainly look at any new and substantial information. What we can say is, if people have new and substantial information, we would like to see it so we can make an evaluation." He had no idea that the Abedin emails sent to her husband, John Wiener's computer, were going to pop up in September. He had no idea. Wait, September 28th. That's right about the time that the FBI discovered that laptop, and it was just a few days later when they told Comey about the information. Yeah, it's right in that same time frame. On June 8, 2017, following his firing as the FBI director, Comey testified about Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. In an exchange with Committee Chairman Senator Richard Burr, Comey was asked about the Midyear investigation, including whether his decision to publicly report the results of the investigation was influenced by the tarmac meeting between former Attorney General Lynch and former President Clinton. Comey responded, "Yes, in an ultimately conclusive way. That was the thing that capped it for me, that I had to do something separately to protect the credibility of the investigation, which meant both the FBI and the Justice Department, which you failed to do miserably." Senator Burr then asked whether there were other things that contributed to Comey's decision that he could describe in an open session. Comey stated, "There were other things that contributed to that. One significant item I know the committee's been briefed on. There's been some public accounts of it which are nonsense, but I understand the committee's been briefed on the classified facts. Probably the only other consideration that I guess I can talk about in an open setting is at one point the Attorney General had directed me not to call it an investigation, but instead to call it a matter, which confused me and concerned me. But that was one of the bricks in the load that led me to conclude I have to step away from the department if we're to close this case credibly." The classified facts indicating potential bias by the former Attorney General referenced in Comey's testimony are discussed in the classified appendix to this report. As described in more detail in that appendix, Comey had concerns about Lynch's ability to credibly announce the closure of the investigation, in part because of classified information learned by the FBI in March 2016 regarding alleged regarding alleged attempts to influence the mid-year investigation by Lynch, as well efforts by Comey to extend the investigation to impact the election. Although the FBI did not find these allegations credible, did not investigate the allegations, and did not inform Lynch about the information until August 2016, Comey was concerned that, if the allegations became known, it could affect the public's perception of Lynch's involvement in the investigation. Comey was asked to provide additional details about Lynch's instruction to call the mid-year investigation a matter by Senator James Lackford. Comey stated, "Well, it concerned me because we were at the point where we had refused to confirm the existence, as we typically do, of an investigation for months, and it was getting to a place where that looked silly, because the campaigns were talking about interacting with the FBI in the course of our work. The Clinton campaign at the time was using all kinds of euphemisms, security review, matters, things like that, for what was going on. We were getting to a place where the Attorney General and I were both going to have to testify and talk publicly about it. And I wanted to know, was she going to authorize us to confirm we had an investigation? And she said, yes, but don't call it that. Call it a matter. And I said, why would I do that? And she said, just call it a matter. And again, you look back in hindsight, you think I should have resisted harder? I just said, all right, this isn't a hill worth dying on. So I just said, okay, the press is going to completely ignore it. And that's what happened. When I said, we have opened a matter, they all reported the FBI has an investigation open. And so that concerned me because that language tracked the way the campaign was talking about FBI's work, and that's concerning." In response to a follow-up question about this testimony, Comey stated, "And again, I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but it gave the impression that the Attorney General was looking to align the way we talked about our work with the way a political campaign was describing the same activity, which was inaccurate. We had a criminal investigation open with, as I said before, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We had an investigation open at the time, and so that gave me a queasy feeling." Comey also had an extended exchange with Senator John Corwin about whether Lynch had an appearance of conflict of interest requiring appointment of a special counsel. Senator Corwin: "But it seems to me that you clearly believe that Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, had an appearance of a conflict of interest on the Clinton email investigation. Is that correct?" Comey: "I think that's fair. I didn't believe she could credibly decline that investigation, at least not without grievous damage to the Department of Justice and to the FBI." Senator Corwin: "And under Department of Justice and FBI norms, wouldn't it have been appropriate for the Attorney General, or if she had recused herself, which she did not do, for the Deputy Attorney General to appoint a special counsel? That's essentially what's happened now with Director Mueller. Would that have been an appropriate step in the Clinton email investigation, in your opinion?" "Certainly a possible step, yes, sir." I'm sorry, it's Cornyn. I'm saying Corwin. Excuse me. Senator Cornyn: "And you were aware that Ms. Lynch had been requested numerous times to appoint a special counsel and had refused?" "Yes. I think members of Congress had repeatedly asked." "Yes, sir." Senator Cornyn: "Yours truly did on multiple occasions, and that heightened your concerns about the appearance of a conflict of interest with the Department of Justice, which caused you to make what you have described as an incredibly painful decision to basically take the matter up yourself, and led to that July press conference." Wow. I'm trying to tell if he likes Comey here, or if he's just being nice, because he's really laying it on thick there. "Yes, sir. After former President Clinton, met on the plane with the Attorney General, I considered whether I should call for the appointment of a special counsel, and had decided that that would be an unfair thing to do, because I knew there was no case there. We had investigated it very, very thoroughly. I know this is the subject of passionate disagreement, but I knew there was no case there, and calling for the appointment of a special counsel would be brutally unfair, because it would send the message, aha, there's something here. That was my judgment. Again, lots of people have different views of it, but that's how I thought about it." Senator Cornyn: "Well, if the special counsel had been appointed, They could have made that determination that there was nothing there and declined to pursue it, right? Comey: sure, but it would have been many months later or a year later. Analysis. We found no evidence that Comey's public statement announcing the FBI's decision to close the investigation was the result of bias or an effort to influence the election. Instead, the documentary and testimonial evidence reviewed by the OIG reflected that Comey's decision was the result of his consideration of the evidence that the FBI had collected during the course of the investigation and his understanding of the proof required to pursue a prosecution under the relevant statutes. Nevertheless, we concluded that Comey's unilateral announcement was inconsistent with department policy, usurped the authority of the Attorney General, and did not accurately describe the legal position of the department prosecutors. Although we found no evidence that Lynch and former President Clinton discussed the Midyear investigation or engaged in other inappropriate discussion during their tarmac meeting on June 27, 2016, we also found that Lynch's failure to recognize the appearance problem created by former President Clinton's visit and to take action to cut the visit short was an error in judgment. We further concluded that her efforts to respond to the meeting by explaining what her role would be in the investigation going forward created public confusion and did not adequately address the situation. Finally, we found that Lynch, having decided not to recuse herself, retained authority over both the final prosecution decision and the department's management of the mid-year investigation, including whether to respond to Comey's call to her on the morning of July 5 by instructing him to share his statement with her. Comey's decision to make a unilateral announcement. Beginning in early 2016, and certainly by late April 2016, the mid-year team reached a general consensus that the evidence would not support a prosecution absent major unexpected developments in the form of newly discovered emails or testimony. This assessment was based on a lack of evidence showing that former Secretary Clinton, her senior aides, or other State Department officials knew that they were emailing unmarked classified information or intended to introduce classified information onto an unclassified system. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. Again, can I prove it? No, but she was allowed to delete 30,000 emails before they started getting hold of her data. So it's kind of obvious what happened there. But again, you can't prove it because she deleted everything. So she gets away with it. Witnesses told us that, at the time, they understood the emails in question were sent by State Department employees to other State Department employees in the course of doing their jobs, and that both the senders and recipients had the appropriate clearances and the need to know the information, except for Weiner on that laptop. As described in Chapter 2, the prosecutors determined, based on their legal research and review of past department practice, that evidence of knowledge or intent was necessary to charge any individual with violations of 18 U.S.C. 793D, 793E, or 793F1. Comey understood and agreed with this assessment. He told us that, as he realized that the case likely would not result in charges, he became concerned that senior department officials were unable to announce a declination in a way that the public would find credible and objective. Comey said that these concerns were based on the public perception created by an Attorney General appointed by a Democratic president, announcing that the Democratic presidential candidate would not be prosecuted, not on any actions or by or concerns specific to Lynch or Yates. However, as discussed below, Comey also pointed to public comments made by then President Obama and his White House press secretary about the mid-year investigation, concerns that classified information referencing Lynch would be publicly released and would impact her credibility, Lynch's alleged admonition to him early on to refer to the FBI's investigation as a matter, and Lynch's meeting with former President Clinton as contributing to his concerns about her. In April 2016, Comey initiated discussions with Yates and Axelrod about how to credibly announce the conclusion of the investigation based on the likelihood that the case would result in a declination. During this discussion, Comey stated that he was likely to request the appointment of a special counsel the deeper we get into summer without concluding the investigation. Comey told the OIG that his reference to a special counsel was intended to induce the department to move more quickly to obtain the Mills and Samuelson laptops. we did not find evidence that Comey at any time seriously considered requesting a special counsel. Lynch told us that she was aware that Yates met with Comey and that Comey indicated he was not sure there was a there, i.e., it was not a prosecutable case. Lynch also was receiving periodic briefings about the mid-year investigation and said that she thought any discussion about announcing a declination were very premature at that time because there were remaining investigative steps to be taken. Lynch told us that she did not know that Comey mentioned requesting a special counsel during his discussion with Yates, and that no one in the department or the FBI ever suggested to her that a special counsel was needed. Green tea with honey. Green tea with mint and honey. Discussions about a strategy for announcing a declination also took place within the FBI. Comey told the OIG that he considered every option for announcing a declination, from a one-line press release issued by the department to an FBI-only press conference providing a detailed statement about the investigation. Comey said that foremost in his mind was the need to minimize the, quote, reputational damage, unquote, to the department and the FBI that would result from a declination, and to preserve the credibility and integrity of the institution. In late April 2016, Comey raised the possibility of, quote, doing something solo, unquote, in a meeting with Baker, McCabe, and Rybicki. He also began drafting a public statement that contemplated that he would act alone in announcing the declination, sending a first draft of the statement to Baker, McCabe, and Rybicki on May 2, 2016. Witnesses told us that Comey had not yet made a firm decision to deliver a public statement when he sent this draft, but that he wanted to discuss it as one possible option for announcing a declination. According to various witnesses we interviewed, Comey and other senior FBI officials knew that delivering a separate public statement held substantial risk. McCabe said that he expressed concerns that such a statement would represent a quote-unquote complete departure from department protocol and could set a, quote, potentially dangerous precedent, unquote, for the FBI. Rosenberg said that in discussions with Comey, he raised the possibility that doing a separate statement would create an irreparable breach with the department. Comey said that he knew it was, quote, crazy idea, but we were in a 500-year flood. Comey discussed the draft's public statement in meetings with members of the mid-year team and with senior FBI officials at various times in May and June 2016. These discussions included whether to do a separate statement at all, in addition to the specific language revisions discussed in Section 3B and C above. Comey said that by June 27, 2016, the date of Lynch's tarmac meeting with former President Clinton, he was, quote, 90% there, like high likely, unquote, in terms of deciding to deliver the statement. Despite this, Comey and other senior FBI officials continued to engage their department counterparts in discussions about how to credibly announce a declination. These discussions occurred at various levels, between Comey and Yates, between McCabe and Carlin, and between Strzok and Loffman. At no time did anyone from the FBI inform anyone from the department that Comey was even considering making a statement on his own, let alone that he had already drafted such a statement. Department witnesses at all levels told us that they believed that shortly after the interview of former Secretary Clinton was completed, the department and the FBI would work together to deliver some sort of coordinated statement, and that Comey would be involved. Yates told the OIG that her understanding was that they would, quote, all be holding hands and jumping off the bridge together, unquote. Comey said that from the time he first conceived of making a separate statement, he intended to deliver it without coordinating with the department. He told the OIG that he made a conscious decision not to tell department leadership about his plans to quote-unquote go it alone because he was concerned that they would instruct him not to do it. Comey admitted that he concealed his intentions from the department until the morning of the press conference and instructed his staff to do the same to make it impractical for department leadership to prevent him from delivering his statement. I think I need more liquid. Stop my tongue from hanging up. We found that it was extraordinary and insubordinate. Now there's a word that you don't expect to see very often. insubordinate for Comey to conceal his intentions from his superiors, the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General, for the admitted purpose of preventing them from telling him not to make the statement and to instruct his subordinates in the FBI to do the same. Is he still your darling, Left? Is he still your darling? Comey waited until the morning of his press conference to inform Lynch and Yates of his plans to hold one without them, and did so only after first notifying the press. As a result, Lynch's office learned about Comey's plans via press inquiries rather than from Comey. Moreover, when Comey spoke with Lynch, he did not tell her what he intended to say in his statement. Factors cited by Comey as influencing his decision. Comey cited several factors that he said influenced his decision to make a statement on his own and without coordinating with the department. In addition to public comments made by former President Obama and his White House press secretary about the Midyear investigation, Comey cited 4 things that he said caused him to be concerned that Lynch could not credibly participate in announcing a declination. Her alleged instruction to call the Midyear investigation a matter in a meeting held on September 28, 2015, which Comey said, quote, made his spider sense tingle, unquote, and caused him to, quote, worry that she's carrying water for the Clinton campaign, unquote. Concerns that highly classified information Concerns that highly classified information referencing Lynch would be publicly released and would impact her credibility, the tarmac meeting between Lynch and former President Bill Clinton, and the fact that Lynch was appointed by a president that was the same political party as former Secretary Clinton. We found none of these reasons persuasive, either standing alone or considered together, as a basis for deviating from well-established department policies and acting unilaterally in a way intentionally designed to avoid supervision by department leadership over his actions. Lynch's reference to the investigation as a matter. We found that the discussion between Lynch and Comey on September 28, 2015 was not generally viewed as a particularly significant event other than by Comey. As described in Chapter 4, Department and FBI officials present at this meeting did not interpret Lynch's reference in the way Comey did, and his contemporaneous notes indicate that the discussion at the meeting was focused on the need to track language in recent letters to Congress and the State Department. Lynch told us that her intent in suggesting that Comey referred to Midyear as a matter was to allow them to answer questions about staffing and resources while also complying with long-standing department policy to refrain from confirming ongoing criminal investigations, not to downplay the significance of the investigation. Other department witnesses present at this meeting interpreted Lynch's comment as a suggestion, not an instruction from Lynch. We found no evidence that this phrasing was intended to track the language used by the Clinton campaign or was an attempt to influence the investigation. Remarkably, Comey never told Lynch or Yates that this or any other incident raised questions about Lynch's impartiality in his mind or that such concerns might influence his actions in handling the case. Concerns about future leaks of classified information. As described in the classified appendix to this report, Comey told the OIG that he became concerned in mid-June 2016 that classified information suggesting that Lynch was exerting influence on the Midyear investigation would be publicly released and that this would impact her ability to credibly announce a declination. However, by mid-June, Comey was already very far along in his plans to make a unilateral statement. Moreover, witnesses told us that the FBI determined based on various factors that the allegations that Lynch had interfered with the investigation were not credible, describing the information as objectively false. Comey told the OIG that he never saw any actions by Lynch to interfere with the investigation, stating, quote, I'll say this again, I saw no reality of Loretta Lynch interfering within this investigation. Rather, Comey said he was concerned that leaks of this non-credible information about Lynch would undermine her credibility. The FBI did not inform Lynch about the allegation in the highly classified information until August 2016, more than a month after Comey's announcement, and then, according to Lynch, did so in a way that highlighted the FBI's assessment that the information lacked credibility. At no time did Comey alert Lynch or Yates that the information raised concerns about Lynch's ability to participate credibly in the mid-year investigation or in any declination announcement. At no time did Comey consult with Lynch or Yates about how to deal with this false information to protect the credibility of the declination decision. It seems like Comey has a habit of letting out the facts too late for the people who are involved to know what to do, or to release just enough facts to scare them and make them do something that they may regret later, like keeping him on the case. Finally, the OIG found that the same classified information also included an allegation equally lacking in credibility that Comey planned to delay the mid-year investigation to aid Republicans. Comey did not inform Lynch or Yates of this fact, let alone discuss with them whether this information might be leaked or whether, if it was, it might undermine his credibility as a spokesman. Lynch's tarmac meeting with former President Clinton. Comey told us that by the time the tarmac incident occurred on June 27, 2016, he was already, quote, 90% there, unquote, in terms of the decision to make a public statement, but that the tarmac meeting, quote, tipped the scales, unquote, towards making up his mind to go forward with an independent announcement on the mid-year investigation. While Comey's concerns about the impact of the meeting were legitimate and warranted his informing Lynch of his concerns and providing her with any views he had on how it should be addressed, ultimately, the decision whether Lynch should voluntarily recuse herself was Lynch's to make, not Comey's. In his October 2016 SAC conference speech, Comey emphasized the damage to the FBI that would result if he, quote, did the normal thing, unquote, in the wake of the tarmac meeting. He stated that he was concerned that if the FBI made a private recommendation to Lynch, quote, the Department of Justice will screw around it for Lord knows how long, issue probably a one-sentence declination, and then the world will catch on fire, unquote. However, the stated concerns are inconsistent with what Comey had already discussed with the department about the quote-unquote end game of the investigation. Comey knew that the department was well aware of his view that the mid-year investigation needed to be completed promptly. Comey had previously discussed with Yates the prospect of requesting a special counsel if the investigation continued past the nominating conventions, and Yates told us that she and Comey had made plans to, quote, hold hands and jump off the bridge together, unquote, in announcing a declination. Moreover, notes from discussions of the mid-year team that occurred shortly before the Clinton interview on July 2 reflected that the prosecutors understood that Comey wanted to make the announcement by July 8, and therefore there would be quote-unquote withering pressure to complete the LHM and memorialize the mid-year prosecutors' conclusions immediately after the Clinton interview. There simply was no basis for Comey to believe that the department would take weeks to act on the FBI's recommendation on such a consequential matter. Moreover, Comey never raised his concerns about the tarmac meeting with Yates or requested that Lynch recuse herself. Instead, Comey viewed the tarmac meeting as a justification for proceeding with his existing plan to act alone. Comey admitted that had Lynch recused herself, he might have reconsidered his decision to make a separate announcement, stating, had Loretta said, I'm stepping out of this, I'm making Sally Yates the acting Attorney General, and I had gone and sat down with Sally and heard her vision for it, maybe we would have ended up in a different place. While Comey indicated that he did not speak with Yates because Lynch had already made her announcement on July 1, we found that he still could have and should have done so. Lynch was appointed by a Democratic president. Comey cited a general concern that Lynch was appointed by a president who was from the same political party as former Secretary Clinton. Yet that fact existed at the beginning of the mid-year investigation. At no time did Comey inform either Lynch or Yates that he viewed Lynch as having a quote-unquote conflict of interest, or that he thought she should be recused from the investigation on the basis of party affiliation or for any other reason. While Comey did mention the prospect of a special counsel in his April 2016 meeting with Yates, he did so seemingly as a bargaining chip to get the department to move more quickly on the Mills and Samuelson laptops, and we found no evidence that he seriously pursued this option. We found it troubling that Comey would have formed views about Lynch's inability to participate in or credibly decline prosecution of the Midyear investigation, yet never once raised them with Lynch or Yates. If Comey genuinely believed that Lynch could not credibly participate in the Midyear investigation or announce a declination, he should have raised these concerns with Yates or Lynch and requested that Lynch recuse herself. If he believed that neither Lynch nor Yates could credibly make a prosecutive decision, he should have discussed this with them at the beginning of the investigation and requested appointment of a special counsel. He did not. Impact of Comey's decision to make a unilateral statement. Comey's decision to depart from long-standing department practice and publicly announce the FBI's declination recommendation without coordinating with the department was an unjustified usurpation of authority. Wow. Let me read that again. Without coordinating with the department was an unjustified usurpation of authority. Although Comey was aware that the Midyear prosecutors and department leadership viewed the case as a likely declination, Comey made the decision to announce the conclusion of the investigation before prosecutors had a chance to render their own formal prosecutorial decision. Comey's views on what a quote-unquote reasonable prosecutor would do, while informed by the prosecutor's views on the likely outcome of the case and the department's research on past mishandling cases, were nonetheless made without consulting the department in advance. Although Comey stated in his press conference that, quote, the prosecutors will make the decision about whether charges are appropriate based on evidence the FBI has helped collect, unquote, by making this public announcement about the FBI's charging recommendations and by stating his view that, quote, no reasonable prosecutor, unquote, would bring charges, he effectively made the decision for the prosecutors because it would thereafter have been virtually impossible for them to make any other decision. Even if Comey had every reason to believe that Lynch and Yates agreed with him, speaking unilaterally and publicly for the department about a decision to decline prosecution is not a function granted to the director. The authority to make such a statement had not been delegated to him by his superiors, the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General. Comey acknowledged this, but argued that, quote, the potential for damage to the institution, unquote, outweighed the need to follow the department practice, stating, in a normal circumstance, it's the right of the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General to make those decisions, and the FBI director should tell them, but this was not the normal circumstance. In our criminal justice system, the investigative and prosecutive functions are intentionally kept separate as a check on the government's power to bring criminal charges. While Comey's statement acknowledged those differing roles and responsibilities, his actions violated those separate authorities by arrogating to himself and the FBI the ability to make judgments about whether a case of the highest political consequence should be charged, and he did so by intentionally seeking to prevent department leadership from being able to stop him based on concerns that he never even gave them an opportunity to consider. In making a statement announcing the conclusion of the Midyear investigation and opining on what the only possible prosecutorial decision could be, Comey made it virtually impossible for any prosecutor to make any other recommendation. He thereby effectively operated as not only the FBI director, but also as the Attorney General. It is the Attorney General who is accountable to the public and to Congress for prosecutorial decisions made by the department, not the head of the investigating law enforcement agency. Comey took that accountability away from Lynch and placed it on himself when he decided to deliver a unilateral statement. Additionally, Comey's decision to make an announcement without consulting or obtaining approval from department leadership violated the department's media policy and also may have violated regulations regarding the public release of information. Although Baker told the OIG that Comey's call to Lynch and Yates on the morning of his press conference constituted approval for purposes of this regulation, Comey's testimony that he concealed his plans from Lynch until the morning of July 5, only contacted her after the FBI had notified the press in order to make it impossible for her to stop him, and told Lynch when they did speak that he was not going to tell her what he intended to say in his statement does not constitute consulting with or obtaining approval from department leadership. In light of these events, we recommend that the department consider making explicit in the USAM what we thought was obvious in light of department policy and protocol, that an investigating agency cannot publicly announce its recommended charging decision in a criminal investigation prior to consulting with the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, U.S. Attorney, or his or her designee, and cannot proceed to publicly announce that decision prior to obtaining a final prosecution decision from one of these officials. And again, Comey knew that was the rule. He knew, because he wouldn't say to anyone in the Department of Justice, here's what I'm going to say. He cut them off completely. It's one of those recommendations that basically you have to say, do not stick your hands in the lawnmower because some idiot stuck his hands in the lawnmower while it was running. It's obvious, but someone has to put that placard on there because idiots do it anyway. Content of Comey's unilateral announcement. We identified two significant substantive concerns with the content of Comey's July 5 statement. First, Comey included criticism of former Secretary Clinton's uncharged conduct, including calling her extremely careless, thereby violating long-standing department practice to avoid what others described as, quote, trashing people we're not charging, unquote. Second, having improperly decided to comment on what were prosecutorial decisions, Comey proceeded to inadequately and incompletely explain how the department's prosecutors applied the relevant statutory provisions and why they believed the evidence was insufficient to support a prosecution. For example, Comey described former Secretary Clinton's handling of classified information as extremely careless, but then asserted that such conduct did not amount to gross negligence under the relevant statute. In so doing, Comey failed to explain that since at least 2008, it had been the department's position that, before bringing a gross negligence case, prosecutors had to be able to prove that a defendant knew at the time that the information was gathered, transmitted, or lost, that it was in fact classified information. As delivered, Comey's statement led to greater public confusion and second-guessing, not greater public clarity. Look what it's done. I mean, that alone right there probably prompted the entire OIG action into this entire investigation. Many of the problems with the statement resulted from Comey's failure to coordinate with department officials. By deciding not to consult with the Midyear prosecutors about their assessment of the department's historical approach to and interpretation of the gross negligence statute, or their assessment of the evidence under the applicable legal standard, Comey lost the opportunity to hear the views of the career prosecutors responsible for prosecuting violations of the mishandling statutes. Based on our interviews, these prosecutors would likely have warned him about the substantive questions presented by his statement. In addition, department witnesses told the OIG that the presentation of the case by the Midyear prosecutors at the briefing of the Attorney General on July 6, 2016, which is described in Chapter 6, differed significantly from Comey's statement, leading these witnesses to conclude that the presentation of the facts in Comey's statement was, quote-unquote, very skewed or delivered with a, quote-unquote, slant. Description of uncharged conduct. It is not unprecedented for the department to announce the completion of investigation without a prosecution. In fact, it happens frequently in high-profile matters, including many federal civil rights investigations. Such an announcement may serve several legitimate purposes, including allowing the public to know that the department thoroughly investigated the matter and lifting the cloud over an individual known to have been under investigation. In limited instances, the department has included criticism of individuals not charged with a crime. Comey cited as precedent for his July 5 public statement the June 2004 press conference by then DAG Comey, summarizing the evidence against Jose Padilla, who was designated as an enemy combatant, and the department's October 2015 letter to Congress summarizing the results of the criminal investigation into IRS officials, which did not result in criminal charges, which should have. However, in both of those instances, the department was responsible for issuing the statement, not the FBI director. Moreover, Comey's announcement was unusual in that it concentrated in substantial part on criticizing former Secretary Clinton's uncharged conduct. This was contrary to long-standing department practice and protocol. Witnesses told us that criticizing individuals for conduct that does not warrant prosecution is something that the department simply does not do. For example, Tosca stated, "We don't say we're closing something, but let me tell you some bad stuff that we saw along the way, but it doesn't rise to the level of bringing a case. We just don't do it." Prosecutor 1 characterized the negative comments about former Secretary Clinton as, quote, declining to prosecute someone and then sort of dirtying them up with facts that you develop along the way, unquote. Department witnesses did not specify a specific regulation or USAM provision that required Comey to refrain from commenting on uncharged conduct, and we found none. Rather, witnesses described this as a practice that is, quote-unquote, ingrained in every department prosecutor. This principle underlies other department policies and practices that do not directly apply in these circumstances, but that are nonetheless salient. USAM 927-760 requires prosecutors to remain sensitive to the privacy and reputation interests of uncharged third parties. For example, by not identifying or causing a defendant to identify a third-party wrongdoer by name or description in public plea and sentencing proceedings without the express approval of the U.S. Attorney and the appropriate Assistant Attorney General prior to the hearing absent exigent circumstances. USAM 927-760 states, in other less predictable contexts, federal prosecutors should strive to avoid unnecessary public references to wrongdoing by uncharged third parties. Similarly, when a case is closed without charges being filed, the department does not seek to unseal the search warrant for the purpose of revealing to the public that there was probable cause that someone engaged in criminal activity. In addition, where the department has concluded that an uncharged individual was a participant in a criminal conspiracy, the department's rules specifically prohibit prosecutors from naming the uncharged co-conspirator in an indictment or including sufficient detail in public filings that would allow the co-conspirator to be identified. The common principle underlying these policies is that neither the FBI nor department prosecutors are permitted to insinuate or allege that an individual who has not been charged with a crime is nevertheless guilty of some wrongdoing. We see no reason why an unindicted co-conspirator should be afforded greater protection than a person who has been investigated and found not to be criminally liable. We therefore recommend that the department and the FBI consider adopting a policy addressing the appropriateness of department employees discussing uncharged conduct in public statements. Several witnesses acknowledged that one major purpose of including negative comments about former Secretary Clinton was to send the message that the FBI was not condoning her conduct, essentially to protect the FBI from criticism that it failed to recognize the seriousness of her conduct and was, quote, letting her off the hook, unquote. We recognize that this investigation was subject to scrutiny, not typical of the average criminal case, but that does not provide a basis for violating well-established department norms and essentially, quote-unquote, trashing the subject of an investigation with uncharged misconduct that Comey, every agent, and every prosecutor agreed did not warrant prosecution. Such norms exist for important reasons, and none of the justifications provided by witnesses for why such criticism was warranted in the Midyear investigation, including expressing disapproval of former Secretary Clinton's conduct to the FBI workforce, quote, countering statements made on the campaign trail that the emails in question were classified after the fact, or informing the American people about the facts of the investigation, provided legitimate reasons to depart from normal and appropriate department practice. Substantive issues with the statement. Department witnesses told the OIG that they considered Comey's statement to be both factually and legally incomplete. These witnesses said that critical facts supporting the decision to decline prosecution were not included in Comey's statement. Axelrod told the OIG that Comey's most notable omission was the failure to explain that the department has never prosecuted mishandling violations, quote, where the classified information was shared between people who work for the government. That's a pretty important fact, unquote. Axelrod and other department witnesses also noted that Comey did not include information explaining that, quote, the majority of the emails that turned out to be classified had been sent late at night or on the weekends, unquote, suggesting that State Department employees sending the emails tried to, quote unquote, talk around classified information in the course of doing their jobs. Department witnesses described the characterization of the evidence in Comey's statement as, quote unquote, very skewed or unintentionally, quote, slanted. Comey also included in his statement a comment that although the FBI did not find direct evidence that former Secretary Clinton's private email account was hacked, the FBI assessed that it was, quote, possible that hostile actors gained access to former Secretary Clinton's personal email account based on various factors. He added that the FBI assessed it would be unlikely to see such direct evidence given the nature of the system and the actors potentially involved in hostile intrusions, and that former Secretary Clinton had used her personal email in the territory of foreign adversaries. The statement thus insinuated that hostile foreign actors may have in fact gained access to former Secretary Clinton's private email account, based almost entirely on speculation and without any evidence from the Midyear investigation to support his claim. As described in Chapter 5, the FBI Midyear forensics agent told the OIG that although he did not believe there was, quote, any way of determining 100%, unquote, whether Clinton's servers had been compromised, he felt, quote, fairly confident that there wasn't an intrusion, unquote. The LHM, summarizing the Midyear investigation, similarly stated, quote, FBI investigation and forensic analysis did not find evidence confirming that Clinton's email server systems were compromised by cyber means, unquote. In addition, Comey's statement failed to describe accurately what the Midyear prosecutors deemed was essential to make out a violation of the gross negligence statute. As described in Chapters 2 and 7, the Midyear prosecutors took into account the legislative history of the statute, previous military prosecutions and indictments brought under it, and the Department's historical interpretation of the provision in declarations dated to at least 2008. Based on this authority, the Midyear prosecutors determined that a violation of Section 793F1 requires 1. A state of mind that is just a little short of being willful, criminally reckless, or so gross as to almost suggest deliberate intention, and 2. Evidence that the individuals who sent emails containing classified information did so, quote, knowingly, unquote. With respect to former Secretary Clinton, the Midyear prosecutors determined that in the absence of evidence showing that she knew that emails she received contained classified information, such as through obvious classification markings, department practice and precedent required that they decline prosecution. That boils my blood. Comey told the OIG that he understood Section 793F1 to require something closer to actual knowledge, yet nowhere in his statement did Comey say that the FBI concluded that former Secretary Clinton lacked the knowledge that the information in question was classified, and that prosecutors determined that evidence of such knowledge was needed to bring charges under the gross negligence statute. On July 6, 2016, Prosecutor 3 sent an email to the other Midyear prosecutors highlighting this problem. He stated, "It's unfortunate that Comey didn't differentiate the standard of proof between 793F and the other statutes. He glossed over all with mention of the absence of intent and made no mention of the necessity of proving knowledge of classified information with regard to 793F and why that proof was deficient. By using the phrase, extremely careless, he lit up the talking heads last night, many of whom opined that such verbiage warranted a gross negligence charge and that Comey was giving Clinton an unwarranted pass. Even the so-called legal experts didn't seem to understand the elements of that statute and why it did not apply to the facts." By describing former Secretary Clinton's conduct as extremely careless, while failing to explain what the Midyear team concluded was the lack of proof for the other requirements of Section 793F1, Comey created confusion about the FBI's assessment of her culpability and the reasons for recommending that prosecution be declined. The focus on former Secretary Clinton's extremely careless handling of classified information foreseeably and predictably led the public to question why the former Secretary Clinton was not being charged with gross negligence. The issue for the Midyear prosecutors was never whether former Secretary Clinton's conduct was extremely careless, but whether her conduct met the requirements for charging a violation of 793F, i.e., whether there was sufficient evidence to establish that she knowingly included classified information on her unclassified private email server or learned that classified information was transferred to her unclassified server and failed to report it. I guess the legal requirement wasn't met, but it's just so obvious that she set the server up in order to get around FOIA requests and the Records Retention Act. But it seems like all they cared about was the classified information. There was so much more that she did that was wrong, that she got away with. Maybe that was the limited scope of the investigation, and they wouldn't look any further. I don't know. The prosecutors concluded that there was not. As described in Chapter 7 below, the prosecutors found no evidence that former Secretary Clinton believed or was aware that emails contained classified information or had concerns about the information included in unclassified emails sent to her. In other words, she's too stupid to charge. Lynch's decision not to recuse after the Tarmac meeting. After the Tarmac meeting with former President Clinton, Lynch obtained an opinion from the Departmental Ethics Office that she was not legally required to recuse herself from the Midyear investigation. Although the opinion was not memorialized in writing, former OAG staff and former officials in the Departmental Ethics Office confirmed that Lynch obtained this opinion and that the conclusion was that recusal was not required. Lynch was entitled to rely on that ethics opinion in the face of subsequent questions about her involvement in the Midyear investigation. Lynch told the OIG that she considered voluntarily recusing herself. However, she thought that doing so would create the impression that something inappropriate had occurred during her conversation with former President Clinton. Lynch said that she felt a responsibility to remain involved in the Midyear investigation because if she decided to recuse herself, she would, quote, be asking someone else to step up and endure all the hits the department will take for the case for the result, whatever it is. I still say that's what seconds in commands are for. Lynch said that she applied her usual process in the Midyear investigation and that her role did not change after the Tarmac meeting. I believe that. Lynch told the OIG that the only thing that differed was that she decided to speak publicly about how the department's process typically works. However, Lynch's July 1, 2016 statements at the Aspen Institute were confusing and created the impression that, while she would not formally recuse herself from the investigation, she also would not remain in a deciding role in the investigation by stating, quote, I will be accepting their recommendations, unquote. In an effort to address the confusion, Lynch sought to clarify her remarks by providing the reporter with another formulation of her intentions, stating, quote, I can't imagine a circumstance in which I would not be accepting their recommendations, unquote. However, these statements continued to make it appear that Lynch would cede her decision-making authority to the career staff and the FBI director in a way that was akin to some type of recusal. In our view, Lynch should have either made it unambiguously clear that she did not believe there was a basis for recusal and that she was going to remain the final decision maker, thereby making her accountable for the final decision, not Comey, or recused herself and allowed Yates to serve as acting attorney general or sought a special counsel appointment. Instead, Lynch took none of these actions, leaving it ambiguous to the public as to what her role would be. Ultimately, that left the public with the perception that the FBI director, and not the attorney general, was accountable for the declination decision. Lynch's response to Comey's notification. As described above, Comey concealed his plans to make a public statement from senior department officials and instructed his subordinates to do the same. He did not inform Lynch and Yates of his plans to hold a press conference until the morning of July 5, 2016. Comey intentionally left the department leadership a short time to respond to his information, admitting that he did this to avoid having them tell him not to do it. That old, it's much easier to ask for forgiveness than permission line. The thing is, Comey didn't get either. Comey notified Lynch and Yates of his plans only after first contacting the press. He did not tell Lynch what he planned to say when she asked. According to Lynch, Comey told her he would not go over his statement with her so they both could say that it was not coordinated. Department officials understandably had concerns about directing Comey to cancel the press conference after he had already announced his plans to hold one. Lynch said, while Comey told her that his statement would be about the mid-year investigation, it did not occur to her that Comey would announce the end of the investigation or the FBI's recommendation. She explained that while she knew that former Secretary Clinton had been interviewed, she was not aware that the investigation was considered complete. Lynch told the OIG that if she had known that Comey was planning to do, that she had known what Comey was planning to do, she would have told him to stop. However, Lynch said that she trusted him based on her long relationship with Comey and his comment to her that it would be better if they could both say that they did not coordinate his statement. Lynch told the OIG that she thought this was a reasonable decision and that it was the right decision under the circumstances because the Comey she knew followed the rules. She said that once Comey started speaking and she realized what he was doing, she had no way to stop him at that point. I mean, short of, dashing across the street and unplugging something. Nonetheless, we found that Lynch retained authority over both the final prosecutive decision and the department's management of the mid-year investigation. This included the authority to insist that Comey share his statement with her and allow the department to review and comment on it. Although we recognize that Comey made it impracticable for her to tell him not to make any statement, given the FBI had already notified the press, there was still time available for her to review his proposed statement and to instruct him to make changes to it. Even if Lynch did not think that Comey was going to announce that the FBI was closing its mid-year investigation, Comey told her the statement was going to be about the mid-year investigation, a case over which she retained the authority and responsibility as the Attorney General. As such, we believe she should have instructed Comey to tell her what he intended to say beforehand and should have discussed it with Comey. I mean, Comey obviously, right now, is the bad guy in this whole thing. He screwed it all up. The investigation itself was run according to the OIG, pretty much according to the way they would have done it, aside from some niceties here and there, and one particular event where they gave immunity to someone, where they would have been better off charging him and then using that as leverage to gain his truthful testimony. Other than that, the OIG has said that they feel the investigation went fine. Comey's the one who blew it up with his statement. He screwed everything over. But Lynch does not look good. She took that meeting with Clinton when she knew she shouldn't have. She let it go on forever when she knew she should have just said hello and kicked him out the door. She did not recuse herself based on the optics. I'm sorry I use that term. I hate that term, but there it is. Based on the optics of the meeting, she gave completely incomprehensible interview to the Washington Post at the Aspen Institute, tried to reclaim that and still screwed it up, and then let Comey run all over her the morning of July 5 when he made his press conference announcement and not held his feet to the fire and made him discuss with her what the press conference was going to be about. Comey looks horrible. Lynch looks kind of stupid, in my opinion. Chapter 7. The Department's Decision Not to Prosecute. After former Director Comey's statement on July 5, 2016, the mid-year prosecutors finalized their analysis and conclusions under the relevant statutes, recommending that prosecution of former Secretary Clinton and others be declined. They then provided their conclusions to NSD supervisors. On the afternoon of July 6, 2016, former AG Lynch held a briefing attended by Comey, McCabe, and other senior department and FBI officials. The mid-year prosecutors briefed Lynch on the relevant evidence, the applicable statutes, and the basis for their recommendations. Following the briefing, the department issued a brief statement announcing that Lynch had accepted the recommendation of the career prosecutors and agents who worked on the mid-year investigation. In this chapter, we discuss the prosecutors' conclusions and the July 6 briefing, focusing on issues that have been subject to public criticism. Consistent with the role of the OIG and our statements that we will not substitute the OIG's judgment for the judgments made by the department or the FBI regarding the substantive merits of the investigative or prosecutive decisions, we reviewed whether there was evidence that the department's decision to decline prosecution was based on improper considerations or bias. As with our review of investigative decisions, our role was not to determine whether a prosecution should or should not have been brought, but rather whether the department's explanation for its declination decision were not unreasonable and whether there was evidence that the justifications offered for the decision were a pretext for improper but unstated considerations. In other words, the right is not going to get what it wants. The declination recommendation. By the way, I don't know if it's declination or declination. I'm going with declination because it's just a little easier to say. If it's declination, forgive me for not getting it right. I hope it's not too grating on you. As described above, the prosecutors and NSG supervisors began to realize that the investigation could lead to a declination in early 2016. As the investigation continued into the spring of 2016, the prosecutors began to consider how to summarize the investigation and to memorialize their legal conclusions to provide to their supervisors and to department leadership. The prosecutors told the OIG that they wanted to wait until the end of the investigation before making a charging recommendation. The prosecutors planned to complete their legal analysis after former Secretary Clinton was interviewed on July 2, 2016. Following Comey's announcement on July 5, 2016, they realized that they had a much shorter time period to do so and worked until almost midnight on July 5 to finish their legal analysis. They completed this process the following afternoon and provided their analysis and conclusions to Toscas. The prosecution's legal analysis referenced an FBI letterhead memorandum, LHM, summarizing the mid-year investigation. In their analysis, the mid-year prosecutors categorized the witnesses that had been interviewed in the investigation into 4 categories. Originators of classified information, i.e., individuals who introduced classified information into unclassified emails, including State Department Bureau of Public Affairs employees, an individual who regularly interfaced with State Department employees, State Department Operations Center employees, and other State Department employees responsible for conveying information to their superiors, U.S. government employees who had involvement with a specific top-secret special access program, TSSAP, senior aides to former Secretary Clinton, including Uma Abedin, Cheryl Mills, and Jake Sullivan, and former Secretary Clinton herself. The prosecutors referred to the first 3 categories of witnesses, the originators, the officials involved with the TSSAP, and former Secretary Clinton's senior aides, collectively as the senders. My nose is just itching. The prosecutors analyzed the conduct of former Secretary Clinton and the senders under 5 statutes. 18 U.S.C. 793D and 793E, willful mishandling of documents or information relating to the national defense. 18 U.S.C. 793F, removal, loss, theft, abstraction, or destruction of documents or information relating to the national defense through gross negligence or failure to report such removal, loss, theft, abstraction, or destruction. 18 U.S.C. 1924, unauthorized removal and retention of classified documents or materials by government employees. See, I thought they've got Clinton on that right there. She deleted 30,000 emails that were under a protection order by by Congress, she somehow, one of her people just decided, oh wait, I need to get rid of all these, and BleachBit them, and boom, they were gone. Actually, I take that back. He deleted an email archive that would have provided those emails. Her lawyers used BleachBit to scrub her computers of quote-unquote personal emails, 30,000 personal emails out of over 60,000 emails, and then said, okay, here's all the stuff that were her work-related emails. And there were only a handful of confidential emails and TS/SAP emails in that list after 4 years of being Secretary of State. I find that incredibly unbelievable. U.S.C. 2071, concealment, removal, or mutilation of government records. 18 U.S.C. 1924, unauthorized removal and retention of classified documents or material by government employees. I may have already read that, excuse me. The requirements of these statutes are described in more detail in Chapter 3. As summarized below, the Midyear prosecutors concluded that there was not a basis to prosecute former Secretary Clinton, her senior aides, or others under any of these statutes. The prosecutors cited the following factual conclusions from the investigation as critical to its recommendation not to prosecute. None of the emails contained clear classification markings as required under Executive Order 13526 and its predecessor. Only 3 email chains contained any classification markings of any kind. These email chains had 1 or 2 paragraphs that were marked C for confidential, but contained none of the other required markings such as classification headers. And Clinton's reason for not believing those C's counted as confidential was that she thought it was a numbering system for the sequence of paragraphs, even though the first C that appeared was the 5th paragraph on the list. But you can't prove she didn't know that. There was no evidence that the senders or former Secretary Clinton believed or were aware at the time that the emails contained classified information. In the absence of clear classification markings, the prosecutors determined that it would be difficult to dispute the sincerity of these witnesses' stated beliefs that the material was not classified. Well, they knew all the classified stuff had been scrubbed, so they could go with that line the whole way through. The senders and former Secretary Clinton relied on the judgment of employees experienced in protecting sensitive information to properly handle classified information. The emails in question were sent to other government officials in furtherance of the sender's official duties, outside of the Senate secure system. There was no evidence that the senders or former Secretary Clinton intended that classified information be sent to unauthorized recipients or that they intentionally sought to store classified information on unauthorized systems. There was no evidence that former Secretary Clinton had any contemporaneous concerns about the classified status of the information that was conveyed on her unclassified systems, nor any evidence that any individual ever contemporaneously conveyed such concerns to her. Although some witnesses expressed concern or surprise when they saw some of the classified content in unclassified emails, the prosecutors concluded that the investigation did not reveal evidence that any U.S. government employees involved in the SAP willfully communicated the information to a person not entitled to receive it or willfully retain the same. The senders used unclassified emails because of, quote, operational tempo, quote, that is, the need to get information quickly to senior State Department officials at times when the recipients lacked access to the classified systems. To accomplish this, senders often refrained from using specific classified facts or terms in emails and worded emails carefully in an attempt to avoid transmitting classified information. I don't like that word attempt. They either did or they didn't. There was no evidence that Clinton set up her servers or private email account with the intent of communicating or retaining classified information, or that she had knowledge that classified information would be communicated or retained on it. And again, no evidence. It's obvious, but you can't prove it. Another Clinton skate. In addition to these facts as described by the prosecutors, various witnesses told us that one reason it was difficult to establish intent was that the mishandling of classified information was a persistent practice at the State Department. These practices made it difficult for the mid-year team to conclude that particular individuals had the necessary criminal intent to mishandle classified materials. According to Prosecutor 4, the problem was that the State Department was so screwed up in the way they treated classified information that if you wanted to prosecute Hillary Clinton, you would have had to prosecute 150 State Department people. I don't know. I mean, is it a proper defense to say I had to because it was too hard to do it the right way? I don't know. Based on facts evincing a lack of intent to communicate classified information on unclassified systems, the prosecutors concluded that there was no basis to recommend prosecution of former Secretary Clinton or the senders of classified information under Section 793D or E. In addition, as described in Chapter 2, prosecutors reviewed the legislative history of the gross negligence provision in Section 793F1 and court decisions impacting the interpretation of it. The prosecutors noted that the congressional debate at the time the predecessor to Section 793F1 was passed indicated that conduct charged under the provision must be, quote, so gross as to almost suggest deliberate intention, criminally reckless, or, quote, something that falls just a little short of being willful, unquote. The prosecutors also reviewed military and federal court cases in previous prosecutions under Section 793F1 and concluded that they involved either a defendant who knowingly removed classified information from a secure facility or inadvertently removed classified information from a secure facility and, upon learning this, failed to report its loss, theft, abstraction, or destruction. In addition, based on a review of constitutional vagueness challenges of Sections 793D and E, the mid-year prosecutors observed that, quote, the government would very likely face a colorable constitutional challenge to the statute if it prosecuted an individual for gross negligence who was both unaware that he had removed classified information at the time of the removal and never became aware he had done so, unquote. The prosecutors concluded that based on case law and the department's prior interpretation of the statute, charging a violation of Section 793F likely required evidence that the individuals who sent emails containing classified information, quote, knowingly included the classified information or transferred classified information onto the unclassified systems, Section 793F1, or learned that classified information had been transferred to unclassified systems and failed to report it, Section 793F2. Applying this interpretation, the prosecutors concluded there was no evidence that the senders of emails knew that classified information had been improperly transferred to an unclassified system or that former Secretary Clinton acted in a grossly negligent manner with respect to receiving emails determined to contain classified information. According to information reviewed by the OIG, the prosecutors also considered whether the decision to conduct official business using a personal server could itself constitute gross negligence, but concluded that there was no evidence that former Secretary Clinton ever considered the possibility that classified information would be present in unclassified emails or on her private email server. I find it disgusting. Distinguishing military prosecutions for grossly negligent mishandling, the prosecutors also noted that there was no evidence that classified emails were provided to or discovered by people who were unauthorized to receive them. The prosecutors stated all of the emails containing information subsequently determined to be classified were sent for work purposes and were delivered to State Department or other U.S. government officials. Regarding Section 1924, the prosecutors stated that the statute requires proof that an individual knew of the removal of classified information and intended to retain that information in an unauthorized location, and that such proof was lacking. The prosecutors cited the absence of classification markings on the emails sent by the senders, with the exception of the 3 emails forwarded to Clinton containing paragraph markings denoting confidential information, as well as the lack of evidence that the senders knowingly took classified information and sent it in unmarked emails over unclassified systems. The prosecutors similarly concluded that former Secretary Clinton did not recognize or have reason to believe that the information sent to her contained classified information. Prosecutors cited Clinton's reliance on the judgment of senior aides and other State Department staff, their attempts to talk around sensitive information in unclassified emails, and her testimony that she did not have reason to question their use of unclassified systems to send that information. The prosecutors concluded that the evidence was insufficient to charge former Secretary Clinton under Section 1924. As I said before, she was too stupid to charge. The prosecutors also concluded that there was insufficient evidence to support prosecution under 18 U.S.C. 2071, which prohibits the willful concealment, removal, or destruction of federal records. They concluded that there was insufficient evidence to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that former Secretary Clinton or her senior aides intended to conceal records, citing testimony that these witnesses expected that any emails sent to a state.gov address would be preserved. The prosecutors acknowledged that this testimony was undercut by former Secretary Clinton's admission that she sometimes communicated with her senior aides using their personal email accounts, as well as an email she received from former Secretary of State Colin Powell at the beginning of her tenure outlining his use of personal email. However, the prosecutors noted that Section 2071 had, quote, never been used to prosecute individuals for attempting to avoid Federal Records Act requirements by failing to ensure that government records are filed properly. Okay, but when, who was it? Kushner was using a private email account in the White House right when the administration first got started up. And he wasn't using it for official business. People were still screaming that he was committing treason. Finally, the prosecutors evaluated whether Mills and Samuelson intentionally deleted emails during the culling process used to separate former Secretary Clinton's, quote, personal and, quote, work-related emails for production to the State Department. They concluded that there was no evidence that emails intentionally were deleted by former Secretary Clinton's lawyers to conceal the presence of classified information on former Secretary Clinton's server, particularly because some of the emails produced as work-related later were determined to contain highly classified, compartmented information. So she did have classified or highly classified compartmented information. I don't see how that works, where they say they only found the 3 chains that had the C's and paragraphs below the main part, but now they say the emails produced as work-related later were determined to contain highly classified compartmented information. I'm missing something here, and I don't know what it is. The Attorney General briefing. A briefing for Lynch and Yates on the prosecutor's recommendation was held in the Attorney General's conference room at 4 p.m. on July 6, 2016. According to the prosecutors, they learned about the briefing after they completed their legal analysis and had only a short time to prepare. Prosecutors 1 and 2 said they quickly divided the topics and prepared bullet points for the presentation based on their legal analysis. Attending the briefing were Lynch, Yates, Axelrod, and David Margolis, at the time the most senior career official in ODAG, as well as several OAG and ODAG staff members. Toscas and Loffman were present from NSC, while Carlin participated by phone. Present from the FBI were Comey, McCabe, Rebecca Baker, FBI Attorney 1, and Strzok. All 4 prosecutors attended the briefing. Toscas told the OIG that he gave a brief introduction at the meeting. Toscas prepared handwritten talking points that he used as a guide for his comments at the meeting, but he said that these did not end up being his precise script. Toscas said that he front-loaded his comments with an acknowledgement that Lynch had stated publicly that she planned to accept the recommendation of the career staff and that the prosecutors and FBI were in agreement that no charges should be filed. So according to Tosca's handwritten talking points, he stated, "At the conclusion of the meeting, you will have the unanimous recommendations of the FBI and DOJ team that this investigation should be closed and that charges should not be brought against anybody within the scope of the investigation in this matter." The notes indicate that Toscas then praised the team and handed the briefing over to Loffman to introduce the prosecutors. Following their introduction, prosecutors 1 and 2 walked through the various legal statutes and the facts developed in the investigation. Prosecutor 2 handled Section 793D and E, while Prosecutor 1 handled discussion of the other statutes, including the gross negligence provision. Lynch described the briefing as, quote, very, very thorough. She said that it lasted about an hour and a half and included a, quote, very specific, very dense briefing of the case. Lynch told the OIG that the prosecutor showed her various documents, including some of the emails that were determined to contain classified information. She said that she asked questions about access to the classified emails and who saw them, as well as numerous questions that related to the issue of intent. Lynch described the prosecutors as, quote, very responsive to her questions. Lynch told the OIG that the meeting included a briefing on key interviews, including the interview of former Secretary Clinton. Lynch said that the prosecutors provided a synopsis of her interview, her reaction when shown documents, and their opinions about what she said. Lynch said she asked whether any of the witnesses, including former Secretary Clinton, had engaged in obstruction of justice, committed perjury, or made false statements, and she was told that they had not. Well, that's not true. Gambetta lied during 2 of 3 interviews. He was proven to lie, and then they gave him immunity, and he came through with what they considered truthful testimony at the end. So I really don't understand where that came from. Prosecutor 1 told the OIG that the discussion with Lynch about Secretary Clinton's interview included whether Clinton was credible when she testified that C, paragraph markings in an email could mean subparagraphs A, B, and C, rather than the paragraph contained information classified at the confidential level. Prosecutor 1 stated that he told Lynch that Clinton's testimony, quote, strained credulity a little bit because, well, if anyone knows confidential, the State Department is the entity that uses confidential information a lot. He said that they discussed with Lynch that their reaction to this explanation was skeptical, but that they also did not know what, quote, people at the very highest levels, unquote, understood about classification markings. Prosecutor 4 said that he recalled Yates also asking whether former Secretary Clinton was truthful in her interview, and they all responded that she was. He said that this answer caused him some consternation, but that he did not disagree. Asked to explain this statement, Prosecutor 4 told the OIG that he did not think that former Secretary Clinton lied in a provable way, but that her responses to questions about paragraph markings for information designated as confidential and her statement that the private server was set up for convenience were questionable. Prosecutor 4 stated, my view was, and still remains, that the private email server was set up to avoid FOIA. If you look at Colin Powell's email, he pretty much was trying to avoid FOIA too. Various witnesses told the OIG that the briefing included legal discussion of the gross negligence provision, and that the prosecutors fielded questions from Comey and Baker about the provision. Prosecutor 2 stated, I think their attorneys hadn't really gotten him up to speed on the prior use of 793F and how it hadn't been used, and the department's view on the statute. So I think it was kind of an opportunity for him and his team to figure out how Comey was going to explain the decision to Congress under 793F. In following the briefing, questions from his team came our way, specifically about 793F. Prosecutor 1 similarly told the OIG that Comey was, quote, very interested in Section 793F, and that, quote, a lot of notebooks came out of the Bureau, unquote, when Prosecutor 1 began to talk about the provision. Prosecutor 1 stated that his briefing about Section 93F included what kind of factors we considered, what gross negligence meant in the criminal context, what it meant in the statute, and how it had been applied in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, also known as the UCMJ. Witnesses told the OIG that they did not discuss Comey's statement at the briefing. However, Yates said that she recalled thinking that, quote, "You kind of wonder if it's the same case," unquote, when she heard the facts as laid out by the prosecutors at the briefing and compared them to Comey's statement. She said that she recalled discussing with Axelrod, Lynch, and Carlin after the briefing whether the briefing impacted what Comey's thinking after the briefing, whether the briefing impacted what Comey's thinking was about the case and how those facts were cast in his statement. Witnesses said at the end of the discussion, Lynch went around the room and asked for people's opinions to see if anyone objected to declining prosecution. According to several witnesses, Margolis responded that he did not see a prosecutable case and that if the department prosecuted former Secretary Clinton, it would be because she was a high-profile public official. Toscas, Baker, and Comey said that Margolis described this as celebrity hunting. Lynch said that she recalled that Margolis then said, "We at the department don't do that. We will bring cases when they should be brought. We don't when they shouldn't be brought." Lynch told the OIG that after everyone had the opportunity to provide his or her opinion, she expressed her appreciation to the team and asked Comey and Strzok to convey her appreciation to the agents who had worked on the case. She said that she then told the group that she accepted the recommendation to decline prosecution and that the department would issue a statement reflecting the decision shortly. Lynch said that about half the group stayed behind to talk about how to announce the declination and that Toscas drafted a short statement. That afternoon, the department released the following statement. Late this afternoon, I met with the FBI Director James Comey and career prosecutors and agents who conducted the investigation of Secretary Hillary Clinton's use of a personal email system during her time as Secretary of State. I received and accepted their unanimous recommendations that the thorough year-long investigation be closed and that no charges be brought against any individuals within the scope of the investigation. Analysis. We analyzed the department's decision to decline to prosecute former Secretary Clinton or anyone else according to the same analytical standard that we applied to other decisions made during the investigation. We sought to determine whether the declination decision was based on improper considerations, including political bias. We both looked for direct evidence of improper considerations and analyzed the justifications offered for the decision to determine whether they were a pretext for improper but unstated considerations. We did not substitute the OIG's judgment for the judgments made by the department. We found that the prosecutor's decision was based on their assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practice in cases involving these statutes. We did not identify evidence of bias or improper considerations. Our analysis focused substantially on 18 U.S.C. 793 F1, the gross negligence statute that has been the focus of much criticism of the department's decision. However, we first addressed the declination decision with respect to the other statutes that the department considered. We begin with 18 U.S.C. 793 D&E, which prohibit the, quote, willful mishandling or which prohibit the, quote, willful mishandling or retention of classified information. As detailed in Chapter 2, courts have interpreted, quote, willfully to mean an act done, quote, intentionally and purposely and with the intent to do something the law forbids, that is, with the bad purpose to disobey or disregard the law, unquote. All of the prosecutors and agents we asked told us that they could not prove that Clinton had actual knowledge that the emails in question were classified or that Clinton used private servers and a private email account with the purpose or intent of receiving classified information on them. None of the emails Clinton received were properly marked to inform her of the classified status of the information. None of the ones that you could recover. Additionally, investigators found evidence of a conscious effort to avoid sending classified information by writing around the most sensitive material. The investigators did not find any emails in which the sender communicated information to someone not authorized to receive it. In brief, we found no evidence that the decision not to prosecute Clinton under these statutory provisions was tainted by bias or other improper considerations. We reached a similar conclusion with respect to 18 U.S.C. 1924, which, as described in Chapter 2, prohibits the, quote, knowing removal of classified information with, quote, intent to retain it in an unauthorized location. In determining that a section of 1924 prosecution was not viable, the prosecutors pointed to the same absence of evidence that Clinton had actual knowledge that any of the emails were classified, or that she used private email servers and a private email account with the purpose or intent of receiving classified information on them. She couldn't help but have. But they can't prove it because they weren't there. The prosecutors distinguished the Petraeus case brought under this section discussed in Chapter 2 on the basis that this case involved clear evidence that the defendant knew the information at issue was classified and took actions reflecting the knowledge that his handling or storage of it was improper. This was precisely the evidence that the investigators told us was conspicuously absent in the Midyear case. We found no basis to conclude that the decision not to pursue a Section 1924 case was tainted by bias or other improper considerations. The department also determined that prosecution under 18 U.S.C. 2071 was not viable. Section 2071 prohibits the concealment, removal, or destruction of a record filed in a public office. The prosecutors concluded that, as to emails on the Clinton servers that were sent to or from government email accounts, because they also existed on government systems, there was no evidence that Clinton or anyone else took any actions to conceal, remove, or destroy them from the government systems on which they resided. To the work-related emails that were not sent to or from any government system, the prosecutors concluded that such emails were, quote, never filed within a public office, unquote. The prosecutors also noted that every prosecution under Section 2071 included the removal or destruction of documents that had already been filed or deposited in a public office. Additionally, the prosecutors found no evidence that the laptop culling process involved the intentional destruction of government records in an effort to conceal them in violation of Section 2071. We did not identify any evidence to suggest that these determinations were based on bias or other improper considerations. That culling process, they deleted 30,000 emails off of that system to provide the work-related emails separate from the quote-unquote personal emails, the 30,000 personal emails that Clinton had on that system. Sure was all a coincidence. The statute that required the most complex analysis by the prosecutors was 18 U.S.C. 793 F1, which criminalizes the removal, delivery, loss, theft, abstraction, or destruction of national defense information through gross negligence. Due in part to Comey's July 5 statement criticizing Clinton for being extremely careless, which many observers equated with being grossly negligent, this provision became the focus of much of the questioning of the declination decision. As detailed above, the prosecutors identified statements in the legislative history of Section 793 F1 that they found indicated that the state of mind required for a violation of that section is so gross as to almost suggest deliberate intention, criminally reckless, or something that falls just short of being willful. In addition, based on a review of constitutional vagueness challenges of Section 793 D&E, the Midyear prosecutors stated that, quote, the government would very likely face a colorable constitutional challenge to the statute if it prosecuted an individual for gross negligence who was both unaware he had removed classified information at the time of the removal and never became aware he had done so, unquote. Based on all these circumstances and a review of the small number of prior civilian and military cases under Section 793F, the prosecutors interpreted the gross negligence provision of 793F1 to require proof that an individual acted with knowledge that the information in question was classified. Investigators and prosecutors told us that proof of such knowledge was lacking. Not inferred, but lacking. We found that prosecutors' interpretation of the requirements of Section 793F1 was consistent with prior department declination decisions that the prosecutors considered and that we reviewed. As noted in Chapter 2 in 2008, the department declined to prosecute former Attorney General Gonzalez based on an interpretation that would have required them to prove that his state of mind was criminally reckless or that he had a state of mind approaching deliberate intention to remove classified documents from a secure location. That same year, the department declined prosecution of an AUSA for mishandling classified information because of its inability to prove that he was criminally reckless. Prosecutors told the OIG that they reviewed these declination decisions to see how the department had construed Section 793F1 in the past. These prior cases demonstrate that the interpretation of the gross negligence requirement of Section 793F1 used as a basis to decline prosecution of former Secretary Clinton was consistent with interpretations applied in prior cases under different leadership. We found no evidence that the conclusions by department prosecutors were affected by bias or other improper considerations. Rather, we concluded that they were based on the prosecutor's assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practice. In reaching this conclusion, we recognize that much of the questioning of the department's prosecutorial decision in this case has focused on whether the department too narrowly interpreted the gross negligence provision of Section 93F1 and should have pursued a prosecution because the FBI found Clinton to be extremely careless. That, however, is a legal and policy judgment involving core prosecutorial discretion for the department to make. Okay, we're up to Chapter 8. Been going for almost for another 2 hours. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the stream. If I haven't told you this before, I'll repeat myself at the risk of being incredibly dull. By stopping the stream, it'll allow YouTube to render this video more quickly and more efficiently than if I had made a 6-hour-long segment. And I don't think YouTube allows more segments longer than 6 hours before it cuts off the stream. So also by doing this, I enable myself to keep going without getting cut off in the middle of something and hardly knowing where I was at because I wasn't paying attention. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the stream, and then about 3 or 4 minutes after I cut it, I'll bring it back up. That'll give YouTube time to know that the stream has stopped and to stop trying to reconnect and then start processing it to upload it to my channel. So give it about 3 or 4 minutes. The resume in 10 minutes sign will come back up on this channel or in your notifications, and you will be able to reconnect almost, like I say, within 3 or 4 minutes. I'll take a 12-minute break. It's 2 minutes till now, so I'll be back at 10 after, and then we'll get going on Chapter 8. So I'll stop the stream now. I'll put up the resume sign, and within a few minutes this will be back up and you'll be able to reconnect. Thank you for your patience, and I'll see you soon.